A pregnant woman sits across from her husband in a sterile Manhattan law office, funeral dress still black from burying her father 3 days ago. He slides divorce papers toward her without meeting her eyes. But beneath the table, her phone lights up with a message that changes everything. Your father left you a $47 billion empire. Evidence suggests he was murdered. You are in danger. She looks up at the man abandoning her for a wealthier woman and smiles for the first time in weeks. Because sometimes the universe doesn't just close a door, it hands you the keys to burn down the entire house. If you want to see how far revenge can take a woman who has nothing left to lose, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard enough to blur the Manhattan skyline into nothing but gray shapes and bleeding light. Scarlett Hayes sat perfectly still in the leather chair, hands folded in her lap, funeral dress clinging to her like a second skin of grief. The fabric was expensive. She'd bought it 3 days ago in a panic at Bergdorf's because she owned nothing appropriate for burying her father. Now it felt like a costume she couldn't take off. Across the polished conference table, Ethan Calloway shuffled papers with the mechanical precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. His tie was loosened just enough to suggest stress without actually looking vulnerable. The overhead lights caught the edge of his jaw, the carefully groomed stubble, the watch she'd saved 6 months to buy him for their anniversary. He still wouldn't look at her. "Ethan," Scarlett said quietly. Her voice came out rougher than she intended, scraped raw from 3 days of crying. "Can we please just talk about this?" He slid a document across the table. Divorce papers. Her name printed in neat black letters across the top like an execution order. "There's nothing to talk about." His tone was flat, practiced. "This has been over for a while, Scarlett. We both know that." She stared at the papers, pulse hammering in her throat. The words blurred together. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. Spousal support waived. "I don't understand," she whispered. "My father just died. I buried him 3 days ago, and you—" "I know the timing isn't ideal." "Isn't ideal?" Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were cold, distant, like he was looking at a stranger instead of the woman who'd worked double shifts for 4 years to put him through law school. "I'm trying to do this respectfully, Scarlett. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." Something cracked open inside her chest. Not grief this time, something sharper. "Respectfully," she repeated. The word tasted like broken glass. "You're divorcing me 3 days after my father's funeral, and you want me to be respectful about it?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Your father is exactly why this isn't working. You've been so consumed with him, with his business trips and his secrets and his—" "He was dying, Ethan. He had 6 months. You were trying to fix something that wasn't your problem." Ethan leaned back in his chair, that familiar condescension creeping into his voice, the tone he used when he was explaining basic legal concepts to clients who didn't go to Yale. "Your father made his choices, you made yours, and I've made mine." Scarlett's hands trembled in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs, nails digging into the fabric of her dress. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Ethan went very still. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, he just stared at her. Then something flickered across his face, not joy, not even surprise, just calculation. "How far along?" he asked carefully. 8 weeks. "Are you sure it's—" "Don't!" Scarlett's voice turned to ice. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Ethan held up his hands in a gesture of false peace. "I'm just asking the obvious question here, Scarlett. We haven't exactly been—" "I know exactly when it happened." She met his eyes, forcing herself not to blink. "February 14th. You came home late from the firm. You'd been drinking. You said you missed me." He had the decency to look away. "I didn't plan this," Scarlett continued, voice shaking. "I'm on birth control, but apparently the universe had other ideas, and now I don't want children." The words came out so simply, so matter-of-fact, that for a moment Scarlett wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. "What?" "I don't want children," Ethan repeated, slower this time, like she was stupid. "I've never wanted children. I thought I made that clear." "You said someday. You said when we were more stable, when your career duukia." "I lied." He shrugged, one shoulder, barely a movement. I told you what you wanted to hear because it was easier than having the same argument over and over again. Scarlett felt like she was falling, like the floor had opened up beneath her chair and she was tumbling through empty space with nothing to grab onto. So what are you saying? She managed. You want me to? I'm saying I'm marrying Vanessa Whitmore next month. The room tilted sideways. Vanessa Whitmore. Vanessa fucking Whitmore. Heiress. Socialite. Daughter of Robert Whitmore, the commercial real estate magnate whose face appeared on Forbes covers and charity gala invitations. The woman Ethan had been networking with at firm events for the past 6 months. Scarlett couldn't finish the sentence. Her throat had closed up completely. Her family has connections, Ethan said calmly, like he was explaining a business merger. Her father sits on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. He knows governors, senators, people who can actually open doors for me. This is about my future, Scarlett, about building something real. We had something real, Scarlett whispered. 4 years of marriage, 4 years of me supporting you, working 60-hour weeks as a social worker while you studied for the bar, and I'm grateful for that. Ethan's tone suggested he was anything but, which is why I'm offering you $50,000. Scarlett blinked. What? He slid another document across the table. A check, already signed, $50,000 made out to Scarlett Hayes. To help you get settled, he explained. New apartment, medical expenses, whatever you need. In exchange, you sign the papers today, and we both move on with our lives. Scarlett stared at the check, at her name printed in careful letters, at the number that represented 4 years of her life reduced to a dollar amount. You want to pay me to disappear, she said slowly. I want to make this as painless as possible for both of us. Painless? She almost laughed. My father just died. I'm pregnant with your child. You're leaving me for a woman whose trust fund is bigger than most countries' GDP, and you think $50,000 makes this painless? Ethan's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic, Scarlett. This is a generous offer, and you know it. More than generous, considering what? He hesitated, just for a second, but Scarlett caught it. Considering what, Ethan? Considering you have no income, he said carefully. No family money, no support system. Your father's estate is probably tied up in legal battles for years, and even if you inherit something, it won't be enough to what? Raise a child? Scarlett's voice climbed. To survive without you? To exist without the great Ethan Calloway guiding my poor, pathetic life? I'm trying to help you. You're trying to erase me. Beneath the table, Scarlett's phone buzzed. She ignored it. Ethan stood up, straightening his tie with practiced efficiency. I have a meeting with Vanessa's father in an hour. I need your answer, Scarlett. Sign the papers or don't. But if you drag this out, if you try to make things difficult, you'll what? Scarlett stood too, hands braced against the table. Sue me? Take me to court? With what money, Ethan? You just said I'm broke. Something ugly flickered across his face. Don't test me. Or what? You'll leave me? She laughed, sharp and bitter. Too late. Her phone buzzed again. Longer this time. Insistent. Ethan grabbed his briefcase. You have 24 hours to sign those papers. After that, my offer expires and we do this the hard way. He headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Scarlett, I did care about you once. Get out. He left without another word. The door clicked shut with the finality of a coffin closing. Scarlett stood alone in the conference room, rain hammering against the windows. Her entire world reduced to divorce papers and a check that felt like blood money. Her phone buzzed a third time. She pulled it out with shaking hands. 3 messages from an unknown number. The first one made her knees buckle. Do not sign anything. The second one stopped her heart. Your father left you control of the Hayes empire. Estimated value? $47 billion. The third one changed everything. Evidence suggests he was murdered. You are in danger. Protection is already on the way. His name is Lucas King. Scarlett read the messages 3 times, then 4. Her brain refused to process the words. They didn't make sense. Her father was Richard Hayes, a successful businessman, sure, comfortable, even wealthy by normal standards. But $47 billion? An empire? Murder? It had to be a mistake, a scam. Someone who'd read her father's obituary and decided to prey on a grieving daughter. Except her father had been acting strange for months before he died. The hushed phone calls, the international trips he wouldn't explain, the way he'd gripped her hand in the hospital during those final days and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry for all of it." She'd thought he meant the cancer, the fact that he'd hidden his diagnosis for so long. But what if... Her phone buzzed again. A new message. "Harrison Cole will meet you at the penthouse in 1 hour. He was your father's personal attorney. He has documents." Proof. Then another. "Lucas King will arrive shortly after. Do not be alarmed by his methods. Your father trusted him with everything. Now you must do the same." Scarlett's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the phone. She looked down at the divorce papers, at Ethan's check sitting on the polished table, at the life she'd been living for 4 years like it belonged to someone else. And she started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that comes from joy, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere dark and broken, the kind that sounds too much like crying, because the universe had a sick sense of timing. Her husband was leaving her pregnant and alone for a woman with family money, and her dead father had just handed her an empire. Usek. The penthouse her father kept in Tribeca had always felt too big, too cold, too much like a museum where real people weren't supposed to live. Scarlett had visited maybe a dozen times in her life, always for stiff formal dinners where her father talked about business ventures she didn't understand, and she picked at expensive food she didn't want. Now she stood in the marble foyer with her funeral dress soaked through from the rain, staring at furniture she'd never been allowed to sit on as a child. The elevator dinged. A man stepped out carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Scarlett's monthly rent. He was older, 60-something, with silver hair and the kind of tailored suit that suggested old money and Ivy League law degrees. His eyes were kind but sharp, taking in Scarlett's appearance with the clinical assessment of someone who'd spent decades reading people. "Ms. Hayes," he said gently, "my name is Harrison Cole. I was your father's attorney for 32 years. Scarlett didn't move. "I don't understand what's happening." "I know." Harrison set his briefcase on the marble side table and removed his coat with careful, practiced movements. "And I apologize for the abrupt nature of these communications. Your father left very specific instructions about how and when you were to be informed of your inheritance." "My inheritance," Scarlett repeated. The words felt foreign in her mouth. The messages said $47 billion. $47.3 billion as of this morning's market close. Harrison opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder bound with a red ribbon. "Your father was not simply a businessman, Ms. Hayes. He was one of the most powerful men in the world." Scarlett's laugh came out harsh and disbelieving. "My father sold medical equipment. He traveled a lot. He was successful, but he wasn't a show." That was the cover story. Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. "The reality is significantly more complex." He handed her the folder. Scarlett opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents, corporate filings, stock certificates, property deeds, offshore account statements. Her father's name appeared over and over again, connected to companies she'd vaguely heard of and dozens she hadn't. Hayes Technologies, Hayes International Shipping, Sovereign Security Solutions, Apex Luxury Properties, Meridian Intelligence Networks. The numbers attached to each entity made her dizzy. "This can't be real," she whispered. "I assure you, it's very real." Harrison pulled out a chair at the dining table and gestured for her to sit. "Your father built an empire over the course of 40 years. Technology, international trade, private security, real estate, intelligence gathering, all carefully structured beneath layers of legitimate business ventures. He was a master at operating in the shadows while maintaining a public persona of moderate success." Scarlett sank into the chair. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "Why didn't he tell me?" Her voice cracked. "Why did he let me think—" "He was protecting you." Harrison sat across from her, his expression grave. "The world your father operated in is extraordinarily dangerous, Ms. Hayes. He had enemies, powerful people who would have used you against him if they'd known you existed as anything more than an estranged daughter he occasionally saw for holidays." "Estranged," Scarlett repeated bitterly. "That's one word for it. He loved you." Harrison's tone left no room for argument. "Everything he built, every risk he took, it was all for you. He structured his entire life around keeping you safe and ensuring that when the time came, you would inherit everything he'd created. And when was that supposed to happen? When was I supposed to find out the truth? Harrison's expression darkened. Not like this. Your father had a plan, a careful, methodical process for introducing you to the Empire over the course of several years. But 6 months ago, he learned he was being targeted. Someone inside his organization was feeding information to his enemies. Someone wanted him dead. The word hung in the air like smoke. The messages said he was murdered, Scarlett said quietly, but the death certificate said cancer. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I watched him die in that hospital bed over 3 weeks. How is that? The cancer was real, Harrison interrupted, but it was also convenient. Your father had maybe a year left, perhaps 18 months. Someone decided not to wait. He pulled out another document, a toxicology report with sections highlighted in yellow. These are blood tests from your father's final week in the hospital. The cancer was killing him slowly, but the compounds in his bloodstream killed him faster. Scarlett felt her stomach turn. Someone poisoned him. Someone with access to his hospital room. Someone who knew his security protocols well enough to slip past them. Harrison's voice hardened. Someone who believed that with your father dead and you completely ignorant of your inheritance, the Empire would fall into chaos and be vulnerable to a hostile takeover. But I'm not ignorant anymore, Scarlett said slowly. Understanding dawned cold and sharp. Which means whoever killed my father knows I know. Which means you're in danger. The elevator dinged again. Scarlett's entire body went rigid. Harrison didn't seem concerned. He simply stood and smoothed his suit jacket, expression calm. That will be Mr. King, he said. Your father hired him 8 years ago as head of security for the Hayes Empire. There is no one on this earth I trust more to keep you alive. The elevator doors opened. A man stepped out and Scarlett forgot how to breathe. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that suggested violence held carefully in check. Black tactical clothing that looked expensive and functional. Dark hair, sharp features, a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His eyes were the coldest shade of blue Scarlett had ever seen, pale enough to look almost gray in certain light. He moved like someone who'd been trained to kill and was very, very good at it. Harrison, he said, voice low and controlled. His gaze flicked to Scarlett and stayed there, assessing her the way a predator might assess prey. Not with hunger, with calculation. Lucas, Harrison gestured toward Scarlett. May I present Ms. Scarlett Hayes, inheritor of the Hayes Empire. Lucas King crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped directly in front of Scarlett's chair. He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to hold his gaze. You have your father's eyes, he said quietly, but your fire is stronger. I don't feel very strong right now, Scarlett admitted. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Something shifted in Lucas's expression. Not quite sympathy, something harder. Strength isn't about how you feel. It's about what you do when everything's falling apart. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat, somehow making the expensive furniture look fragile beneath him. Your father was a great man, complicated, ruthless when necessary, but great. He spent the last 8 years preparing for this moment, preparing you for this moment, even if you didn't know it. I don't understand. You will. Lucas pulled out his phone and set it on the table. First, I need you to tell me everything that happened today, starting with why you were in a law office downtown during the worst rainstorm of the season. Scarlett's throat closed up. She glanced at Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. My husband, she started, then stopped. My ex-husband, almost ex-husband. He filed for divorce. Lucas's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. When? Today. 3 days after I buried my father. Scarlett's hands clenched in her lap. He's marrying someone else next month, a woman named Vanessa Whitmore. Her family has money and connections, and apparently that's more important than 4 years of marriage or the fact that I'm... She stopped. The fact that you're what? Lucas asked, voice carefully neutral. Pregnant, Scarlett whispered. 8 weeks. Silence dropped over the table like a weight. Harrison cleared his throat. Does Mr. Calloway know? I told him today. He offered me $50,000 to sign the divorce papers and disappear quietly. Scarlett pulled out her phone and showed them the check, still folded in her bag. He said he didn't want children. He said he never wanted children. He lied to me for 4 years. Lucas picked up her phone and studied the check with cold precision. Then he handed it to Harrison, who examined it with the same intensity. Vanessa Whitmore, Lucas said slowly. Daughter of Robert Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Commercial Properties. You know him? Scarlett asked. I know everyone your father considered a threat. Lucas's smile was sharp enough to cut. Robert Whitmore has been trying to purchase several of your father's Manhattan properties for the past 6 years. Richard refused every offer. The Whitmore family company is hemorrhaging money, bad investments, over-leveraged real estate, and Robert's gambling problem draining liquid assets. They're on the edge of bankruptcy. Scarlett felt cold understanding wash over her. So Vanessa isn't marrying Ethan because she loves him. Vanessa is marrying Ethan because her family is desperate, Lucas confirmed. And your ex-husband is marrying her because he's an ambitious little snake who sees a shortcut to power. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Did he know about your father's empire? No, I didn't even know. He thought my father was just a medical equipment salesman who traveled a lot. Good. Lucas exchanged a glance with Harrison. That means his betrayal is purely opportunistic, not coordinated. He's an idiot, not a threat. He still destroyed my life, Scarlett said quietly. No. Lucas's voice turned sharp. He destroyed the life you thought you were living. There's a difference. He tapped the documents Harrison had spread across the table. This is your real life, Scarlett. $47 billion. An empire that touches every major industry in the Western world. Enemies who will kill you the second they get a chance. And a choice. What choice? Lucas King looked at her with those cold, calculating eyes and said, You can run. Take the money. Disappear somewhere safe. Live quietly for the rest of your life while I and a team of lawyers manage the empire in your name. Or you can fight. You can step into your father's shoes, claim what's yours, and become the most powerful woman in New York. I'm a social worker, Scarlett said weakly. I help families navigate the foster care system. I don't know anything about running an empire. Your father was a factory worker's son from Pittsburgh, Lucas countered. He built this empire from nothing. You're his daughter. You have his blood, his mind, his ruthlessness, even if you haven't found it yet. He leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed despite the weight of what he was saying. But you need to decide now, because the people who killed your father are watching. And the second they believe you're weak, they'll come for you. Scarlett looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she was still wearing despite everything, at the funeral dress that smelled like rain and grief, and the ashes of who she used to be. She thought about Ethan, about the way he'd looked at her across that conference table like she was an inconvenience to be managed, about Vanessa Whitmore and her family's desperation and the casual cruelty of being offered $50,000 to erase herself from someone's life. She thought about her father, about all the times he'd missed birthdays and holidays, all the times she'd felt like an afterthought in his life. And now she understood why. He'd been building her a throne. I want to fight, Scarlett said quietly. Lucas King smiled for the first time since entering the penthouse. It was a predator's smile, all teeth and promise. Good, he said. Then let's destroy everyone who thought you'd break. Harrison pulled out a secure phone, sleek, black, encrypted. This is yours now. It has one number programmed into it. Lucas's personal line. If you're in danger, if you need anything, you call him. Understood? Scarlett took the phone. It was heavier than she expected. Understood. Tomorrow morning we begin your education, Lucas continued. You'll meet with department heads from every major division of the Hayes Empire. Technology, shipping, security, real estate, intelligence. They'll brief you on operations, financials, threats. It will be overwhelming. You'll feel like you're drowning. That's normal. What if I can't do this? Scarlett asked. What if I'm not strong enough? Lucas stood, towering over her. Then you learn to be. Your father spent 40 years building power. You're going to learn it in 6 months. He offered her his hand. Starting now. Scarlett took his hand and stood. His grip was firm, steady, anchoring. What happens with Ethan? She asked. With the divorce? Lucas's expression turned dark. What do you want to happen? What do you want? Scarlett thought about it. About 4 years of her life poured into a man who discarded her the moment something shinier came along. About the baby growing inside her that he didn't want. About $50,000 sitting on a conference table like hush money. I want him to understand exactly what he threw away, she said slowly. I want him to see me become everything he never believed I could be. And then I want him to realize he'll never touch me or my child or my empire ever again. Lucas's smile widened. We can work with that. Oh, 3 days later, Scarlett stood in front of the mirror in her father's penthouse bedroom and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back wore a custom black suit from a designer whose name Scarlett couldn't pronounce. Her hair pulled into a sleek bun, minimal makeup emphasizing the angles of her face rather than softening them. She looked expensive, dangerous, like someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. She looked like her father's daughter. Lucas appeared in the doorway dressed in his usual black tactical clothing. He'd been staying in the penthouse since that first night, sleeping in one of the guest rooms, a constant shadow Scarlett was starting to find oddly comforting. They're waiting, he said. Scarlett took a breath and followed him to the study. Inside, 5 people sat around her father's massive mahogany desk. Harrison Cole she recognized. The others were strangers, hard-eyed, sharp-dressed, the kind of people who looked like they'd seen everything and survived. Lucas made introductions with clinical efficiency. David Chen, CFO of Hayes Technologies. Margaret Ross, Director of Operations for Hayes International Shipping. James Mitchell, Head of Sovereign Security Solutions. And Victoria Kane, Intelligence Liaison for Meridian Networks. Each of them nodded as their name was called. None of them smiled. This is Scarlett Hayes, Lucas continued, Richard's daughter and inheritor of the Empire. You will treat her with the same respect you showed her father. You will follow her orders without question, and you will protect her with your lives if necessary. Understood? Understood, they said in unison. Scarlett sat in her father's chair, massive leather, worn in places from decades of use. It felt too big. She felt too small. But she lifted her chin and met each person's eyes in turn. I know I'm not my father, she said clearly. I know I don't have his experience or his reputation, but this empire is mine now, and I intend to keep it. She paused. I also intend to find out who killed him. Victoria Kane leaned forward, her sharp features arranging into something that might have been approval. Your father was investigating a mole inside the organization, someone feeding information to Marcus Vance. The name hit Scarlett like a punch. Marcus Vance, the hedge fund manager? Hedge fund manager, corporate raider, and the man who's been trying to dismantle your father's empire piece by piece for the past 15 years, James Mitchell said grimly. He's been buying up shares through shell companies, planting people inside our organization, sabotaging contracts. Your father was close to identifying his inside source when he died. Died? Scarlett repeated. You mean was murdered? Yes. She absorbed that, turned it over in her mind. What do we know about Vance's current operations? David Chen pulled up a tablet and slid it across the desk. Financial reports, stock movements, acquisition attempts. He's making aggressive moves on Hayes Technologies specifically, trying to force a hostile takeover by destabilizing our board of directors. Scarlett studied the numbers. They meant very little to her, but the pattern was obvious even to an amateur. He's trying to capitalize on my father's death, create chaos and confusion while there's a power vacuum. Exactly, Margaret Ross confirmed. Which means we need to make a public statement, soon. Let the world know Richard Hayes had an heir and the empire isn't vulnerable. The Sovereign Gala, Lucas said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. It's in 3 weeks. Every major player in New York will be there. CEOs, investors, politicians, all of Richard's old allies and enemies. If Scarlett attends, it sends a message. It also paints a target on her back, Harrison warned. She already has a target on her back, Lucas countered. Better to face it head-on than hide and look weak. Scarlett felt their eyes on her, waiting for a decision. She thought about Ethan, about the way he'd looked at her like she was disposable, about Vanessa Whitmore and her failing family empire, about her father dying in a hospital bed while someone poisoned him. I'll go, she said, but I'm not going alone. Lucas's expression shifted into something that might have been satisfaction. No, he agreed. You're not. Amtip. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, briefings, financial reports, and late-night strategy sessions. Scarlett learned more about corporate warfare and international business than she'd ever imagined existed. She learned which board members were loyal and which were bought. She learned how to read stock movements and identify hostile acquisition attempts. She learned the difference between legitimate intelligence gathering and corporate espionage. And she learned that her father had been far more ruthless than she'd ever imagined. He destroyed Marcus Vance's first company, Victoria Kane explained one evening, spreading documents across the dining table. 20 years ago, Vance tried to corner the market on rare earth minerals. Your father undercut him at every turn, bought out his suppliers, and tanked his stock price. Vance lost everything. That's when the vendetta started. My father made an enemy and spent 20 years fighting him, Scarlett said slowly. And now I've inherited that war. Yes. Scarlett looked at the documents. Decades of conflict condensed into paper and ink. Then I need to end it. Lucas, standing by the window overlooking the Manhattan skyline, turned to face her. Ending it means destroying Vance completely, making him so weak he can never threaten you again. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to protect what's mine. Scarlett met his eyes. Teach me how. Something shifted in the space between them. Lucas crossed the room slowly and sat across from her at the table. Your father used 3 primary weapons, he said quietly. Money, information, and fear. Money buys loyalty and destroys enemies through market manipulation. Information reveals vulnerabilities and gives you leverage. Fear keeps people from challenging you in the first place. And which one do I use on Marcus Vance? All 3. Lucas's smile was sharp. But first, we deal with your ex-husband. Scarlett blinked. Ethan? He's not part of this. Yes, he is. Lucas pulled up his phone and showed her a photograph. Ethan and Vanessa Whitmore at some upscale restaurant laughing over wine. He signed his divorce papers yesterday, rushed them through using Vanessa's family connections to a judge. The marriage is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, the same week as the Sovereign Gala. So he's moving on with his life, Scarlett said, hating how much it still hurt. Good for him. Not good for him. Lucas zoomed in on the photograph. Because while he's been planning his wedding, my team has been digging into his finances. Want to know what we found? Scarlett leaned forward despite herself. What? Debt. Massive amounts of debt. Lucas swiped through several documents. Credit cards maxed out. Personal loans from questionable sources. And here's the interesting part. Forged loan documents with your signature on them. Scarlett's blood ran cold. What? Your ex-husband has been taking out loans in your name for the past 18 months. Small amounts at first, then larger. Gambling debts, luxury purchases, investing in schemes that went nowhere. He's buried you both under nearly $200,000 in hidden debt. That's identity theft, Scarlett breathed. That's criminal fraud, Harrison confirmed, having entered the room silently. We have evidence, documented proof, enough to send him to prison for 5 to 7 years. Scarlett stared at the documents, at her forged signature, at the systematic betrayal of someone she'd trusted completely. He was going to leave me with all of it, she said slowly. He was going to divorce me, marry Vanessa, and stick me with $200,000 in debt while I was pregnant and unemployed. Yes. And the $50,000 he offered me? Lucas's expression turned dark. Barely enough to cover a quarter of what he stole. Scarlett felt something inside her shift. Not break. She'd already broken in that conference room 3 weeks ago. This was different. This was hardening, sharpening into something cold and focused. What are my options? She asked quietly. We can turn over the evidence to law enforcement, Harrison said. He'll be arrested, prosecuted, likely convicted. Or? Scarlett looked at Lucas. Or we destroy him publicly, Lucas said. Use the information as leverage. Make him understand exactly who you are and what kind of power he threw away. His eyes glinted. Make him regret ever underestimating you. Scarlett thought about it. About justice versus revenge. About mercy versus making an example. I want the gala, she said finally. I want to walk into that room as Richard Hayes' daughter, an inheritor of his empire. I want every powerful person in New York to see me claim what's mine, and I want Ethan and Vanessa there when it happens. They're already on the guest list, Victoria confirmed. Robert Whitmore has attended every Sovereign Gala for the past 15 years. Perfect. Scarlett stood, smoothing her suit jacket. Then let's give them all a show they won't forget. Lucas King stood as well, towering over her but somehow making her feel taller instead of smaller. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. Scarlett met his cold blue eyes and smiled. Good, she said. Let's make him even prouder. Dick. The night before the Sovereign Gala, Scarlett couldn't sleep. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her father's penthouse, watching Manhattan glow beneath a clear sky. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably sleeping peacefully beside Vanessa. Somewhere out there, Marcus Vance was planning his next move against the Hayes Empire. Somewhere out there, the person who'd poisoned her father was still breathing. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Can't sleep? Lucas's voice, low and familiar now after weeks of constant proximity. Too much in my head, Scarlett admitted. She didn't turn around. What if I fail tomorrow? What if I walk in there and everyone sees through me, sees that I'm just a social worker playing dress-up in my dead father's empire? They won't see that. Lucas came to stand beside her at the window. Want to know what they'll see? What? Richard Hayes' daughter, a woman who walked into hell and came out holding the keys. He was quiet for a moment. Your father used to stand here every night, right in this exact spot. He told me once that looking at the city reminded him why he built what he built. Power is just potential, he said. It's what you do with it that matters. Scarlett finally looked at him. In the dim light from the windows, his scar seemed deeper, his eyes more shadowed. What do you think I should do with it? Whatever the hell you want, Lucas said simply. That's the point of power. No one gets to tell you who to be anymore. Something shifted in the air between them. A charge, electric and dangerous. Thank you, Scarlett said quietly. For everything. For protecting me, teaching me, not treating me like I'm fragile. Lucas's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You were never fragile, Scarlett. You were just trapped. There's a difference. They stood there in the window, two people staring at a city full of enemies and opportunities, and Scarlett felt something settle inside her. Tomorrow, she would step into her father's world. Tomorrow, she would face Ethan and Vanessa and Marcus Vance and everyone else who thought Richard Hayes' death meant the Empire was vulnerable. Tomorrow, she would show them all exactly how wrong they were. But tonight, she stood beside Lucas King and let herself be human for just a few more hours. Get some sleep, Lucas said eventually. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Are you worried? Scarlett asked. Lucas turned to face her fully. About your safety. Always. About your ability to handle what's coming. He shook his head. Not for a second. He left her standing at the window, his footsteps fading down the hall toward his room. Scarlett stayed there until dawn began to break over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. And somewhere deep inside her chest, something her father had planted years ago finally began to take root. Not grief, not fear, power. The dress arrived at 6 in the morning. Scarlett heard the elevator ding and found Lucas standing in the foyer with a garment bag draped over one arm and a jewelry case in his other hand. He looked like he'd been awake for hours, sharp-eyed and alert despite the early hour. This better not be a funeral dress, Scarlett said, still wearing pajamas and nursing coffee that tasted like bitter survival. It's not. Lucas hung the garment bag on the coat rack with more care than she'd expected from someone who looked like he could break a man's neck without raising his pulse. Your father had this commissioned 8 years ago. He kept it locked in a vault downtown with instructions that if anything happened to him, it was to be delivered to you the morning of the Sovereign Gala. Scarlett set down her coffee cup. Her hands weren't quite steady. He knew. 8 years ago, he knew this moment would come. Your father knew everything. Lucas opened the jewelry case. Inside lay a pair of diamond earrings that caught the morning light and threw it back in sharp, brilliant fragments. These belonged to your mother. Scarlett's throat closed. She hadn't thought about her mother in years. Couldn't think about her without drowning in memories of a car accident when Scarlett was 7 and a funeral where her father had stood stone-faced and silent. She'd inherited her mother's dark hair, her sharp cheekbones, her habit of biting her lower lip when she was thinking. I didn't know he kept them, she whispered. He kept everything. Lucas's voice gentled slightly. He just didn't know how to show you. Scarlett reached out and touched one of the earrings. The diamond was cold against her fingertip, smooth and perfect, and worth more money than she'd made in her entire career as a social worker. "What time do we need to leave?" she asked. 7 tonight. The gala starts at 8. We'll arrive fashionably late, 9:30. Lucas checked his watch. "Which gives you 13 hours to prepare." 13 hours to become someone I'm not. 13 hours to become someone you've always been. Lucas met her eyes. "You ready?" Scarlett thought about Ethan, about the way he'd slid those divorce papers across the table like she was a problem to be solved, about Vanessa Whitmore and her family's desperation, about her father dying in a hospital bed while someone poisoned him slowly and methodically. "Yeah," she said. "I'm ready." Guaik. By 7 o'clock that evening, Scarlett stood in front of the full-length mirror in her father's bedroom and barely recognized herself. The dress was black velvet with gold threading along the bodice, cut to emphasize her figure without being obvious about it. The fabric moved like liquid shadows when she walked. The diamonds her mother once wore caught the light every time she turned her head. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate twist that made her neck look longer, her features sharper. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. She looked like someone who could ruin you without raising her voice. Lucas appeared in the doorway dressed in a black tuxedo that somehow made him look even more lethal than his usual tactical clothing. The scar through his eyebrow seemed more pronounced in the low light. His eyes tracked over her appearance with clinical assessment before something else flickered across his face, something that wasn't quite approval but felt warmer. "You look like your father," he said quietly, the way he looked when he was about to destroy someone and wanted them to see it coming. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a warning." Lucas offered her his arm. To everyone else. Scarlett took his arm and felt the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric. They walked to the elevator together, her heels clicking against marble with each step. "What happens when we get there?" she asked as the elevator began its descent. "We make an entrance. Let people see you. Let them understand that Richard Hayes had an heir and she's not going away." Lucas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus Vance will be there. He'll try to approach you, assess whether you're a threat. Don't engage him directly. Let him wonder." "What about Ethan?" "Ethan Calloway and Vanessa Whitmore are scheduled to arrive at 8:30. They don't know you'll be there. When they see you—" Lucas paused. "Well, that's when things get interesting." The elevator doors opened to the underground parking garage. A Rolls-Royce waited, sleek and black and armored enough to survive a small war. A driver Scarlett didn't recognize stood beside the rear door. "This is Marcus," Lucas said, nodding toward the driver. "Former Secret Service. He's driven your father for the past 12 years. Marcus opened the door with a slight bow. "Ms. Hayes, it's an honor." Scarlett slid into the back seat, Lucas following close behind. The leather smelled expensive. The partition between front and back was tinted dark enough that she couldn't see through it. They pulled out into Manhattan traffic, merging smoothly into the river of headlights and brake lights flowing toward the Upper East Side. "Tell me about the Sovereign Gala," Scarlett said, watching the city slide past her window. "It's been held annually for 36 years, Lucas explained. Started by a group of billionaires who wanted a private venue to conduct business away from regulatory oversight. Over time, it evolved into the most exclusive event in New York. Attendance is invitation only. No press allowed, no recordings. Everything that happens inside stays inside." "Sounds like a place where dangerous deals get made." "The most dangerous." Lucas adjusted his cufflinks with practiced ease. "Your father attended every year, made alliances, destroyed enemies, built his empire one conversation at a time. Tonight, you're taking his place at the table." Scarlett's stomach twisted. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if I—" "You won't." Lucas's tone left no room for argument. "You're Richard Hayes' daughter. That alone gives you power. The rest is just theater." They drove in silence for several minutes. Scarlett watched the city transform around them, from the glass towers of downtown to the historic brownstones of the Upper East Side. Wealth accumulated with every block they traveled. "Lucas," she said quietly, "what did my father tell you about me?" "Before he died?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He said you were the only person he'd ever truly loved. He said he'd spent your entire life keeping you at arm's length because he was terrified that getting close to you would get you killed. And he said—" Lucas's voice roughened slightly. He said that if anything happened to him, my only job was to make sure you survived long enough to become the woman he always knew you could be. Scarlett felt tears burn behind her eyes. She blinked them back ruthlessly. Did he know he was being poisoned? He suspected, near the end. Lucas stared straight ahead. He made me promise not to tell you until after he was gone. Said you'd try to save him, and that would put you in danger. So he just let himself die. He was already dying. The cancer was going to kill him within 6 months. Whoever poisoned him just accelerated the timeline. Lucas finally looked at her. He used those final weeks to put everything in place for you. Updated his will, secured loyalties, made sure Harrison and I would be there when you needed us. He died protecting you, Scarlett, same way he lived. Scarlett pressed her palm against her stomach, where her pregnancy was still invisible beneath the velvet dress. 8 weeks and counting, growing something that Ethan didn't want and her father would never meet. This baby, she said softly, my father would have wanted... Your father would have moved heaven and earth to protect that child, Lucas interrupted. Same way I will. Same way everyone loyal to the Hayes Empire will. His expression hardened. That baby is the next generation, the future, and no one touches the future. The car slowed to a stop. Scarlett looked out the window and saw the venue for the first time. The Sovereign was a converted mansion from the Gilded Age, all limestone and ornate architecture and iron gates that looked like they could withstand a siege. Red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries streamed through the doors beneath glittering chandeliers. Showtime, Lucas murmured. Marcus opened the door. Scarlett took a breath and stepped out into the night. Okay. The moment her heels touched the red carpet, conversation stopped. Not obviously. Not all at once. But Scarlett felt the attention shift toward her like a physical force. Heads turning, whispers rippling outward, eyes assessing her from behind champagne flutes and practiced smiles. Lucas offered his arm and she took it, letting him guide her toward the entrance with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here. A doorman in formal livery checked a tablet. Name? Scarlett Hayes, Lucas said. His tone suggested the doorman should already know. And Lucas King. The doorman's eyes widened fractionally. He tapped something into his tablet and stepped aside immediately. Welcome, Ms. Hayes, Mr. King. Please enjoy the evening. They walked through massive oak doors into a foyer that looked like something from another century. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of dead men in gilded frames. A string quartet played something classical and melancholy from a corner balcony. The crowd inside was everything Scarlett had expected and more. Men in custom tuxedos that probably cost more than luxury cars. Women dripping in jewelry that could fund small countries. Everyone moving through the space with the casual ease of people who'd been wealthy for so many generations, they'd forgotten what struggle felt like. Lucas guided her toward the main ballroom. That's Senator Morrison, he murmured, nodding toward a silver-haired man holding court near the bar. He's been on your father's payroll for 12 years. Votes however we tell him to vote. We own a senator? Your father owned 3 senators, 2 governors, and a federal judge. Lucas's tone suggested this was perfectly normal. Welcome to how the world actually works. They moved deeper into the ballroom. More heads turned. More whispers spread. Scarlett felt like she was walking through a minefield where every step could detonate something catastrophic. A woman in a silver gown approached. She was older, 60-something, with the kind of bone structure that suggested Scandinavian ancestry and enough Botox to make her expression unreadable. Lucas King, the woman said, her accent faintly European. I heard Richard passed. My condolences. Catherine. Lucas's grip on Scarlett's arm tightened slightly. May I introduce Scarlett Hayes, Richard's daughter and heir. Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose fractionally. Richard had a daughter? He kept me private, Scarlett said, lifting her chin. For security reasons. Of course. Catherine's eyes traveled over Scarlett's dress, the diamonds, the Hayes family signet ring gleaming on her right hand. Well, this changes things considerably, doesn't it? What things? Scarlett asked. Everything, darling. Catherine's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Your father and I had several business arrangements in place. I assume those will continue? That depends, Scarlett said carefully, on whether they benefit the Hayes Empire. Catherine laughed, delighted. Oh, she's Richard's daughter, all right. Same fire. She raised her champagne glass in a mock toast. Welcome to the wolves' den, dear. Try not to get eaten alive. She glided away, leaving Scarlett's heart hammering against her ribs. Who the hell was that? Scarlett breathed. Catherine Volkov, Russian oligarch, owns half the natural gas pipelines in Eastern Europe. Lucas steered her toward a quieter corner. She and your father had a complicated relationship. Allies when convenient, enemies the rest of the time. And she just threatened me. No, she tested you, and you passed. Lucas's expression held a hint of approval. Keep doing that. They spent the next hour circulating through the ballroom. Lucas introduced her to a parade of powerful people, CEOs, investors, politicians, foreign dignitaries. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Surprise that Richard Hayes had a daughter. Assessment of whether she was a threat or an opportunity. Thinly veiled attempts to gauge her intentions for the Empire. Scarlett felt like she was playing poker with cards she didn't know how to read. And then she saw him. Ethan. He stood near the champagne fountain talking to an older man in an expensive but slightly dated tuxedo. Robert Whitmore, Scarlett guessed. Vanessa clung to Ethan's arm in a red dress that was trying too hard to be memorable. Her laugh carried across the ballroom, high-pitched and practiced. Scarlett's entire body went cold. Lucas felt her tense. Breathe, he murmured. You're a queen, remember? He's nothing. But Ethan wasn't nothing. Not yet. Not while her heart still clenched at the sight of him. Not while 4 years of marriage still left bruises she could feel beneath her skin. Robert Whitmore noticed her first. His eyes widened fractionally before he leaned in to whisper something to Ethan. Ethan turned and saw Scarlett. The color drained from his face so fast she thought he might pass out. His champagne glass trembled in his hand. Beside him, Vanessa followed his gaze and went very still. Now, Lucas said quietly, we approach. What? No, I can't. Yes, you can. Lucas's hand pressed against the small of her back, firm and unyielding. This is your moment. Take it. They crossed the ballroom floor slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to notice. Conversation stuttered and died in their wake. By the time they reached Ethan and Robert Whitmore, half the room was watching. Robert, Lucas said smoothly, extending a hand. Good to see you. Robert shook his hand warily. Lucas, I wasn't aware you'd be attending. I go where Ms. Hayes goes. Lucas gestured toward Scarlett with the kind of deference that somehow made her feel taller. May I introduce Scarlett Hayes, Richard Hayes' daughter and inheritor of the Hayes Empire. Robert's hand shot out automatically. Miss Hayes, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a remarkable man. He was. Scarlett shook his hand and forced herself to smile. I understand you've been trying to purchase several of his Manhattan properties for the past 6 years. Robert's smile froze. Well, yes. Business opportunities, you understand. I'm sure we can... Those properties aren't for sale. Scarlett's tone was pleasant, final. They'll never be for sale. I hope that clears things up. Silence crashed over their little circle. Ethan still hadn't spoken. He stood frozen, staring at Scarlett like she was a ghost or a nightmare. Vanessa's perfectly manicured nails dug into his arm hard enough that Scarlett could see white pressure points forming. Ethan, Scarlett said softly, I don't think we've been formally introduced. I'm Scarlett Hayes. Ethan's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Scarlett, what are you... How are you... Here. She tilted her head. I was invited. As Richard Hayes' daughter and heir to his fortune, I'm invited to quite a lot of things now. She paused. Congratulations on your engagement, by the way. Vanessa, that's a lovely dress. Vanessa's smile looked like it physically hurt. Thank you. I didn't realize you and Ethan knew each other. Oh, we know each other very well. Scarlett's eyes never left Ethan's face. We were married for 4 years, until very recently. The information landed like a grenade. Robert Whitmore's expression transformed into something between horror and rage. Vanessa's face went white. Ethan looked like he wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow him whole. Robert turned to Ethan. You told me she was nobody, a social worker from Brooklyn with no family and no money. She was, Ethan said desperately. She is. I don't understand what's happening. What's happening, Lucas said quietly, dangerously, is that Mr. Calloway made a very expensive mistake. He divorced Richard Hayes' only daughter 3 days after her father's funeral so he could marry into your family, Robert. I imagine that's going to be awkward at Thanksgiving. Robert's face turned purple. You lied to me. You said your ex-wife was... I didn't know. Ethan's voice climbed. She never told me. She let me think her father was some traveling salesman who built a $47 billion empire while keeping his family private for security reasons, Scarlett interrupted. Her voice was calm, controlled, nothing like the screaming match she wanted to unleash. My father protected me, something you never bothered to do. Vanessa finally found her voice. This is insane. Ethan, you said she worked in foster care. You said she had student loans, and I did work in foster care, Scarlett confirmed. And I did have student loans, which I paid off last week with a fraction of the trust fund my father left me. She smiled. Turns out I'm very good at budgeting. People were openly staring now. Phones were out despite the no recording rule. This was too good not to document somehow. Robert grabbed Ethan's arm. We need to talk. Now. Wait. Ethan reached toward Scarlett. Scarlett, please. I didn't know. You have to believe me. If I'd known who you were, you would have what? Scarlett took a step closer. Her voice dropped low enough that only their circle could hear. Stayed married to me? Pretended to love me? Used me to get close to my father's empire? No, You offered me $50,000 to disappear. Scarlett's eyes hardened. I could buy and sell you 1,000 times over with my monthly interest payments. Ethan's face crumpled. Scarlett, Ms. Hayes, she corrected. You lost the right to my first name when you signed those divorce papers. Lucas touched her elbow gently. We should move on. You have other people to meet. Scarlett nodded. She looked at Ethan one last time, really looked at him, at the man she'd loved enough to sacrifice everything for, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Enjoy your wedding, she said. I'll send a gift. Maybe some marriage counseling. She turned and walked away on Lucas's arm, leaving Ethan standing frozen beside his furious future father-in-law and his horrified fiancée. The ballroom erupted into whispers. That, Lucas murmured as they moved toward the terrace, was perfect. Scarlett's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs beneath the velvet dress. I think I'm going to be sick. No, you're not. You're going to breathe and remember that you just destroyed him in front of everyone who matters. Lucas guided her through the French doors onto a balcony overlooking Central Park. Cool night air hit her face. How do you feel? Terrified, powerful. Like I just jumped off a cliff. Scarlett gripped the stone railing. God, did you see his face? Everyone saw his face. Lucas leaned against the railing beside her. By morning, the entire city will know that Ethan Calloway divorced a billionaire heiress to marry into a failing real estate empire. His reputation is destroyed. Good. Scarlett's voice came out harder than she expected. He deserves it. Yes, he does. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the gala muffled behind closed doors. Scarlett's heart was still racing, adrenaline singing through her veins like electricity. My father would have handled that better, she said quietly. He would have been colder, more controlled. Your father spent 40 years learning control. Lucas turned to face her. You've had 3 weeks. You're doing fine. I don't feel fine. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. You're not pretending. Lucas's voice was firm. This is who you've always been. You just didn't know it yet. Before Scarlett could respond, the French doors opened behind them. A man stepped onto the balcony. He was older, mid-60s, with silver hair and the kind of expensive grooming that suggested a personal barber came to his house. His tuxedo was impeccable. His smile was warm, practiced, and completely untrustworthy. Lucas went very still beside her. Ms. Hayes, the man said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. I've been hoping to meet you all evening. And you are? Scarlett asked, though something in Lucas's sudden tension told her she already knew. Marcus Vance. He extended a hand. I was a colleague of your father's. We had complicated business dealings over the years. Scarlett didn't take his hand. I know who you are, Mr. Vance. My father's files were very detailed. Marcus's smile widened. I'm sure they were. Richard was nothing if not thorough. He lowered his hand. I wanted to offer my condolences, and to see if perhaps we could discuss— No, Lucas interrupted. His voice was flat, dangerous. Ms. Hayes has nothing to discuss with you. I was speaking to the lady, Lucas. Marcus's eyes never left Scarlett's face. Surely she can speak for herself. I can. Scarlett lifted her chin. And my answer is the same. I have nothing to discuss with the man who tried to destroy my father's empire for 20 years. Tried? Marcus chuckled. My dear, the game isn't over. It's only just beginning. He took a step closer. Lucas moved simultaneously, positioning himself slightly in front of Scarlett. Your father was a worthy opponent. I wonder if his daughter will prove the same. She's not your opponent, Lucas said quietly. She's your reckoning. Something flickered across Marcus's face. Not fear exactly, but acknowledgement. He nodded slowly. We'll see. He looked at Scarlett. Your father died under mysterious circumstances, didn't he? Such a tragedy. Cancer is so unpredictable. Scarlett's blood turned to ice. What did you just say? Only that Richard's passing was very sudden. One day he was fighting, the next— Marcus shrugged elegantly. Well, these things happen. Get away from her, Lucas said, voice dropping to something lethal. Now! Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. Of course. I didn't mean to upset anyone. He backed toward the doors, still smiling. Welcome to the game, Ms. Hayes. I look forward to our next conversation. He disappeared back into the ballroom. Scarlett grabbed Lucas's arm. He was there. He poisoned my father. I know it. Knowing and proving are different things. Lucas's jaw was tight. But yes, he was involved. I'd stake my life on it. Then we take him down. We destroy him the way he destroyed— Not yet. Lucas gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Not until we have proof. Not until we know exactly who's on his side and who's on ours. If we move too fast, we show our hand and he'll disappear into legal protections we can't touch. So what do? We play the long game. Lucas's eyes were hard, cold, calculating. We smile and shake hands and pretend we're not hunting him. And when the moment comes, we strike fast enough that he never sees it coming. Scarlett nodded, forcing herself to breathe. Okay, I can do that. I know you can. Lucas released her shoulders but stayed close. But we should go back inside. People will notice if you're gone too long. They returned to the ballroom together. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, small talk, and champagne. Scarlett didn't drink because of the pregnancy she hadn't told anyone except Lucas about. People treated her differently now, with respect tinged with caution, like she was something dangerous they needed to handle carefully. She caught glimpses of Ethan throughout the night. He looked miserable. Vanessa looked furious. Robert Whitmore looked like he was calculating exactly how much money he'd lost by letting his daughter get engaged to the wrong man. Near midnight, Harrison Cole appeared at her elbow. We need to talk, he said quietly. Privately. Lucas frowned. What's wrong? Not here. Harrison's expression was grim. There's a study on the second floor. 5 minutes. He disappeared into the crowd. Scarlett and Lucas exchanged glances. Then they followed. Yeah, the study was exactly what Scarlett expected from a Gilded Age mansion. Leather chairs, mahogany bookshelves, the smell of old money and older secrets. Harrison stood by the window, backlit by moonlight, holding his phone like it might explode. What happened? Lucas demanded, closing the door behind them. David Chen called. Harrison turned to face them. Someone's been accessing the Hayes Technologies servers. High-level clearance codes. Downloading files, financial records, client lists. Scarlett's stomach dropped. The mole. Yes, Harrison's voice was tight. Whoever poisoned your father is still inside the organization, and they just made their move. Can we trace it? Lucas asked. We're trying, but they're using ghost protocols, routing through proxy servers across 6 countries. Harrison looked at Scarlett. They're looking for something specific, going through your father's private files, personal correspondence, meeting notes. They're looking for evidence, Scarlett said slowly. Evidence that Richard knew about the poisoning. Evidence that he documented who was betraying him. Which means your father did know, Lucas said grimly. And he left that information somewhere they can't find it. He turned to Harrison. Did Richard keep a secure location? Somewhere physical, off the grid? Harrison hesitated. There's a property in the Adirondacks. A cabin your father used when he needed to disappear. No digital footprint, no paper trail. If he hid something, that's where it would be. Then that's where we're going, Scarlett said immediately. Tonight. It's a 6-hour drive, Harrison warned. And if they're monitoring you, they're already monitoring me. Scarlett thought about Marcus Vance's smile, his casual mention of her father's death. Let them watch. Let them wonder where I'm going. Lucas nodded slowly. We can take the helicopter. 2 hours instead of 6. Land in the woods near the property and approach on foot. You have a helicopter? Scarlett asked. Your father had a helicopter. It's yours now. Lucas was already pulling out his phone. I'll make the arrangements. Harrison, keep monitoring the breach. Let us know if they get close to anything critical. There's something else, Harrison said. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. This was delivered to my office today. Hand-delivered by courier. No return address. He handed it to Scarlett. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Her father. In the hospital. Days before he died. Someone had taken this photo through the window of his room, a long-distance shot that captured Richard Hayes in his bed, tubes running from his arms, eyes closed. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a shadow. Someone standing in the room with him. Scarlett flipped the photo over. On the back, written in careful block letters, "He knew too much, so do you. You." The room tilted sideways. Lucas grabbed the photo from her shaking hands, studied it, then handed it to Harrison. His expression had gone absolutely deadly. They're threatening you, he said flatly. Whoever killed your father is putting you on notice. Good, Scarlett heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant. Let them try. Scarlett, no. She looked at Lucas, at Harrison, at the photograph that proved someone had been in her father's hospital room murdering him while she stood helpless in the hallway. I'm done being afraid. I'm done being careful. My father spent his life protecting me, and it got him killed. So now I'm going to do what he would have done. What's that? Lucas asked quietly. Scarlett met his eyes. I'm going to war. The helicopter cut through the night sky like a blade through black water. Scarlett sat strapped into the leather seat, hands gripping the armrests hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. Through the window, Manhattan disappeared behind them, a sprawl of lights that looked almost beautiful from this height, almost innocent. The engine noise made conversation impossible, which was fine because Scarlett didn't trust herself to speak without screaming. Someone had photographed her father dying. Someone had stood in that hospital room and watched him struggle for breath while poison worked through his bloodstream, and they documented it like a trophy. Lucas sat across from her, face illuminated by the glow of his phone screen. He'd been messaging his security team for the past 20 minutes, coordinating something Scarlett couldn't quite follow. His expression was carved from stone, jaw tight, that scar through his eyebrow seeming darker in the helicopter's dim lighting. Harrison had stayed behind in the city to monitor the server breach and keep up appearances at the gala. They'd left through a service entrance, changed into tactical clothing in the back of an armored SUV, and driven straight to the private helipad Lucas maintained on the East River. Now they were headed into the Adirondack wilderness to search for evidence her father had hidden before someone murdered him. The absurdity of it hit Scarlett in waves. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a social worker helping foster kids navigate the system. Now she was flying through the night with a man who looked like he could kill someone with his bare hands, hunting for proof that her father had been assassinated by someone inside his own organization. The helicopter began its descent. Through the window, Scarlett saw nothing but darkness and trees. Then Lucas pointed toward a clearing barely visible in the moonlight. The pilot, another one of Lucas's people, someone Scarlett hadn't been introduced to, guided them down with practiced precision. They landed hard enough that Scarlett's teeth clacked together. Lucas unbuckled immediately and pulled a duffel bag from beneath his seat. He withdrew 2 tactical vests, 2 flashlights, and a handgun that looked military grade. You know how to shoot? he asked, checking the weapon's magazine with swift, efficient movements. No. Then stay close to me and do exactly what I say. He strapped on his vest, secured the gun in a shoulder holster, then helped Scarlett into her own vest. His hands were impersonal, professional, checking each buckle and strap like he was preparing equipment rather than dressing a person. The pilot opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and earth and something wild Scarlett couldn't name. We'll be back in 2 hours, Lucas told the pilot. If we're not, call this number. He handed over a card. Tell them code black and give them our coordinates. The pilot nodded. He didn't ask questions. Lucas jumped out first, then reached back to help Scarlett down. Her boots sank into soft ground. Above them, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. The helicopter's rotors wound down slowly, the noise fading until all Scarlett could hear was wind moving through trees and her own ragged breathing. This way, Lucas said quietly. He turned on his flashlight and started walking. Scarlett followed. The cabin was a mile from the landing site, hidden so deep in the woods that Scarlett wouldn't have found it without Lucas guiding her. It wasn't really a cabin, more like a bunker disguised as a hunting lodge. Reinforced walls, security cameras mounted in trees, a door that looked wooden but felt like steel when Lucas pressed his palm against it. Biometric lock, he explained, programmed to recognize your father's handprint, mine, and now yours. He took Scarlett's hand and pressed it flat against the panel beside the door. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, the cabin was sparse. One main room with a kitchenette, a bedroom visible through an open doorway, a bathroom Scarlett could glimpse to the left. But what dominated the space was the desk against the far wall, and the dozens of filing cabinets surrounding it. Jesus, Scarlett breathed. How much did he hide here? Everything he couldn't risk keeping in the city. Lucas moved through the cabin with the ease of someone who'd been here before. He checked windows, tested locks, scanned for any sign of disturbance. This place hasn't been touched. Good. Scarlett approached the desk. Papers covered every surface, legal documents, financial records, photographs of people she didn't recognize. Her father's handwriting covered margins and post-it notes, sharp, angular script that made something in her chest ache. She picked up one of the photographs. A man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, expensive suit. Her father had written across the bottom, MV, Geneva meeting, 2019, proposed merger, declined. That's Marcus Vance, Lucas said, reading over her shoulder. Your father documented everything, every meeting, every conversation, every threat. Scarlett set down the photograph and pulled open the nearest filing cabinet. It was organized by year and category. She found folders labeled Hayes Technologies, internal threats, Vance Holdings, hostile actions, personnel files, under investigation. We're looking for anything related to the poisoning, Lucas said. Names, dates, hospital access records. Your father knew someone was betraying him. He would have started narrowing down suspects before he died. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, pulling files and spreading them across the floor. Scarlett's pregnancy made her movements slower, more careful. She kept having to stop and breathe through waves of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness and everything to do with reading her father's documentation of his own murder. She found the file tucked in the back of the bottom drawer. The label read, Final Insurance, open only if Richard Hayes is dead. Scarlett's hand shook as she pulled it out. The folder was thick, stuffed with documents. She set it on the desk and opened it. The first page was a letter in her father's handwriting. Scarlett, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't a better father. I'm sorry I kept you at a distance. I'm sorry I'm leaving you with this impossible burden. But I need you to know the truth. The person who killed me is someone you trust, someone close, someone I trusted for years before I realized my mistake. I can't prove it yet. If I could, they'd already be destroyed. But I know. And now you need to know. The evidence is here. Everything you need to expose them. Everything you need to protect yourself and the Empire. Be careful who you trust, Scarlett. In this world, loyalty is bought and sold like any other commodity. I love you. I should have told you that more often. R. Scarlett read the letter 3 times. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard and focused on the documents beneath. The first was a hospital access log from the week her father died. It showed everyone who'd entered his room using their staff credentials. Most of the names Scarlett didn't recognize: nurses, doctors, medical techs. But 3 names stood out. Harrison Cole, her father's attorney, visited 6 times. David Chen, CFO of Hayes Technologies, visited twice. And Lucas King, head of security, visited 11 times. Scarlett's blood went cold. She flipped to the next document. Toxicology reports with sections highlighted. Then financial records showing wire transfers from an offshore account to a pharmaceutical company that manufactured the compounds found in her father's bloodstream. Then emails, encrypted correspondence between someone using the alias Raven and Marcus Vance discussing the Hayes problem and permanent solutions. And finally, buried at the bottom of the file, a photograph. Lucas King shaking hands with Marcus Vance outside a restaurant Scarlett didn't recognize. The date stamp read 6 months before her father's death. Scarlett's entire world tilted sideways. She turned slowly. Lucas stood by the window, back to her, checking something on his phone. The gun was still holstered at his shoulder. His tactical vest made him look bigger, more dangerous. "Lucas," Scarlett said. Her voice came out steady despite the panic screaming through her skull. "When did you meet with Marcus Vance?" Lucas went very still. Then he turned around slowly. His expression gave nothing away. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Scarlett held up the photograph. "This. You and Vance, 6 months before my father died." Lucas's eyes flicked to the photo. Something shifted in his face. Not quite surprise, but close. "Where did you find that?" "In my father's files. The ones he left for me to find if he died." Scarlett's grip on the photograph tightened. "The ones that say the person who killed him is someone I trust." Silence dropped between them like a physical weight. Lucas took a step forward. Scarlett took a step back, her hip hitting the desk. "Scarlett," Lucas said carefully, "that photograph isn't what it looks like." "Then what is it?" Her voice climbed. "Explain to me why you were meeting with the man who's been trying to destroy my father's empire for 20 years. Explain why your name is on the hospital access log 11 times during the week someone was poisoning him. Explain—" "I was investigating him." Lucas's voice hardened. "Your father asked me to get close to Vance, find out what he was planning. That meeting was surveillance, not betrayal." "Surveillance!" Scarlett laughed, sharp and bitter. "You were surveilling him by shaking his hand and smiling?" "Yes. That's how undercover work functions." Lucas moved closer. Scarlett's hand found the edge of the desk, fingers searching for anything she could use as a weapon. "Your father knew Vance had someone inside the organization feeding him information. I was trying to figure out who." "And did you?" Scarlett's eyes burned. "Did you figure out who the traitor was?" "No. Not before your father died." "How convenient." Scarlett pulled out another document, the wire transfers. "And these?" "Payments from an offshore account to a pharmaceutical company. An account traced back to Sovereign Security Solutions. Your company, Lucas." Lucas's jaw tightened. That account was compromised. Someone inside my organization was using our infrastructure to buy poison that killed my father. Scarlett's voice broke. "You had access to everything. His schedule, his security protocols, his hospital room. You visited him 11 times while he was dying. 11 times you could have been dosing him with compounds that accelerated the cancer." "I was protecting him," Lucas said, voice rising. "I was there because your father asked me to investigate everyone who entered his room. I was documenting every visitor, every medical procedure, every possible vector for—" "Liar!" The word ripped out of Scarlett's throat. "You killed him! You killed my father! And then you swooped in to protect me so you could control the empire. So you could make sure I never figured out the truth. That's insane." Lucas took another step forward. Scarlett grabbed a letter opener from the desk and pointed it at him with shaking hands. He stopped immediately. "Scarlett, listen to me. I loved your father. He was the closest thing to family I've ever had. I would have died for him." "But you didn't die. He did." Tears streamed down Scarlett's face. "And now you're standing here lying to me with evidence of your guilt literally in my hands." Lucas's expression cracked. For the first time since she'd met him, He looked genuinely shaken. You're wrong. I didn't kill Richard. I've spent every day since his death trying to figure out who did. You're very convincing. Scarlett's grip on the letter opener tightened. But my father was convinced too. Right up until someone he trusted murdered him. Lucas's hand moved toward his gun. Scarlett pressed the letter opener against her own throat. Don't, she said. Don't you dare. Lucas froze. What are you doing? Insurance. Scarlett's voice shook. You need me alive, don't you? The Empire only transfers if I'm alive and competent. If I die now, everything goes into probate and your access gets cut off. I don't want you dead, Lucas said slowly, carefully, like he was talking to someone standing on a ledge. I want you safe. I want to find out who really killed your father and destroy them. It was you. It wasn't. Then who? Scarlett demanded. If it wasn't you, who else had access? Who else benefited from his death? Lucas opened his mouth, closed it. Something flickered across his face. Realization, horror, understanding dawning too late. Oh God, he breathed. Harrison. What? Harrison Cole. Lucas pulled out his phone with movements that seemed almost frantic. He visited your father 6 times. He had power of attorney. He controlled all the legal documents and he stopped. His face went white. He's the one who gave you that secure phone, the one programmed with only my number. Scarlett's mind raced. So? So he could track you, monitor every conversation, make sure you trusted me enough to follow me anywhere. Lucas's voice turned sharp. Like into the middle of the wilderness with no backup and no witnesses. Understanding crashed over Scarlett like ice water. You think Harrison set us up, she said slowly. I think we need to get out of here, now. Lucas moved toward the door. The explosion blew out the windows. Scarlett hit the floor hard, ears ringing, vision white with shock. Glass rained down around her. The desk above her head caught most of the debris. She tasted blood, copper, and sharp. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Lucas shouting her name. Then gunfire. Sharp cracks that punched through the walls and sent splinters of wood flying. Scarlett curled into a ball beneath the desk, hands over her head, the letter opener still clutched in one fist. Lucas returned fire from somewhere near the shattered window. 3 shots, controlled and precise. Then he was moving, crossing the room in a crouch, grabbing Scarlett by the vest and hauling her to her feet. Back door, he barked. Move. Scarlett stumbled after him. Her legs didn't want to work properly. The whole world felt tilted, wrong, moving underwater. They burst through the bedroom into a narrow hallway. Lucas kicked open a door at the end, reinforced steel disguised as wood, and shoved Scarlett through it. Outside, the forest was chaos. Muzzle flashes in the trees, dark figures moving between the trunks. More gunfire, closer now. Lucas grabbed Scarlett's hand and ran. They crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at Scarlett's face. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The tactical vest weighed 1,000 pounds. Behind them, men were shouting, coordinating, hunting. How many? Scarlett managed between gasps. At least 6. Lucas pulled her left, away from the voices. Professional? Military training. Harrison? Has to be. No one else knew we'd be here. They ran for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. Scarlett's lungs burned. Her legs screamed. The baby! Oh God, the baby! She pressed one hand to her stomach and kept running. Lucas pulled her down behind a massive fallen tree. They crouched there, both breathing hard. Lucas checked his gun's magazine. 3 bullets left. The helicopter, Scarlett whispered. If we can get back to they'll have it covered. Harrison would have sent people there first. Then what do we do? Lucas looked at her. In the moonlight filtering through the canopy, his face was all sharp angles and shadow. The scar through his eyebrow looked like a crack in marble. We survive, he said. More gunfire, closer. A tree branch exploded 6 feet from their position. Lucas fired back twice. Scarlett heard someone scream. 2 bullets left. Listen to me, Lucas said. His voice was steady despite everything. There's a ranger station 3 miles east. If we can reach it, there are radios, phones, weapons. But we have to move fast and we can't stop. I'm pregnant, Scarlett said. The words came out before she could stop them. 8 weeks. I can't. Lucas's expression shifted. Yes. And if we don't survive this, neither does the baby. Scarlett met his eyes. So whatever happens, whatever you have to do, promise me you'll get us to that ranger station. Lucas grabbed her face in both hands. I promise. But Scarlett, I didn't kill your father. I swear on everything I am. I didn't. Scarlett wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But the evidence said otherwise. And right now, evidence was the only thing keeping her alive. Get us to safety first, she said. Then we'll figure out who to trust. Lucas nodded. He released her face and checked their surroundings. Then he stood, pulled Scarlett to her feet, and started moving again. They made it another half-mile before the trap closed. Men stepped out from behind trees in a coordinated circle. 6 of them, all armed, all wearing tactical gear that made them blend into the darkness. Professional killers hired by someone with money and motivation. Lucas pushed Scarlett behind him and raised his gun. 2 bullets, 8 targets counting the men he'd already engaged. The math didn't work. One of the men stepped forward. He was older, 50-something, with a face that looked like it had been broken and healed wrong too many times. Ms. Hayes, the man said. His accent was vaguely Eastern European. You're coming with us. Not happening, Lucas said flatly. You have 2 bullets. We have 47. The math is simple. So is dying. Lucas's voice dropped to something lethal. First bullet goes through your skull. Second goes through whoever's closest to her. Then I kill the rest of you with my hands. You want to test me? The man smiled. Marcus Vance sends his regards. He said to tell you your father died slowly and that you will too if you don't cooperate. Scarlett felt rage surge through her, hot and blinding. Vance sent you? He owns us, just like he'll own you once we deliver you to his facility upstate. The man gestured with his rifle. Drop the weapon, Mr. King, or we start with the kneecaps and work our way up. Lucas didn't move. His gun stayed steady, trained on the man's forehead. Scarlett's mind raced. They were surrounded, outgunned, miles from help. The baby in her stomach felt impossibly fragile, a life she'd barely begun to comprehend suddenly hanging by a thread. If I go with you, she said carefully, what happens to him? Scarlett, no, Lucas started. What happens to him? She repeated, louder. The man shrugged. Mr. King dies here. We can make it quick if he cooperates. And if I go with you, you let him live? Scarlett, do we have a deal? Scarlett demanded. The man considered. Sure. Why not? He's not our primary target. Scarlett stepped out from behind Lucas. Then take me. No. Lucas grabbed her arm. Absolutely not. I'm not letting you. You promised to protect the baby. Scarlett met his eyes. This is how you do it. You stay alive. You find proof that clears your name or damns you, and if I survive long enough for you to find me, her voice cracked, then maybe we both make it out of this. I won't leave you, Lucas said. His grip on her arm tightened. I can't. You don't have a choice. Scarlett pulled away from him. She walked toward the men with her hands raised. I'm Scarlett Hayes, Richard Hayes' daughter and heir to his empire. Take me to Marcus Vance. The man nodded to his team. 2 of them moved forward with zip ties. Lucas raised his gun. Scarlett turned to look at him one last time. Find the truth, she said, whatever it is, whoever it implicates. Find it and finish this. Then the men grabbed her, and everything went black. Scarlett woke up in a moving vehicle. Her head pounded, her mouth tasted like chemicals. Zip ties cut into her wrists behind her back. She was lying on her side in what felt like the back of a van, darkness broken only by thin lines of light seeping through seams in the walls. She tried to sit up and immediately vomited. Someone laughed. She's awake, a voice said. Not the leader from the forest. Someone younger. The van hit a bump. Scarlett's shoulder slammed against the metal floor. Pain shot through her arm and she bit down on a scream. How much longer? Another voice asked. 2 hours to the facility. Vance wants her secured before dawn. Scarlett forced herself to breathe, to think. Her father had trained her for this without her realizing it. All those years of watching him operate from the shadows, learning how power worked, understanding that survival sometimes meant playing a role until you saw an opening. She was pregnant, zip-tied, kidnapped by professional killers working for the man who'd murdered her father. And Lucas King was either her only hope or her worst enemy. The van drove on through the night, carrying Scarlett Hayes toward whatever hell Marcus Vance had prepared for her. And she understood with crystal clarity that everything she'd become in the past 3 weeks, every ounce of power, every moment of strength, meant absolutely nothing if she couldn't figure out how to survive the next 2 hours. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Be careful who you trust, Scarlett. In this world, loyalty is bought and sold like any other commodity. She'd trusted Lucas. She'd trusted Harrison. She'd trusted her father to tell her the truth before he died. And now she was alone in the dark, hands bound, baby growing inside her, with nothing but her own mind to keep her alive. So she started planning. Because if there was one thing Richard Hayes had taught his daughter, even from beyond the grave, it was this. You don't survive by being strong. You survive by being willing to burn down everything and everyone who underestimates you. And Scarlett Hayes was done being underestimated. The van stopped. Scarlett heard voices outside, muffled through metal walls. Footsteps. The scrape of a lock being turned. Then the doors swung open, and harsh fluorescent light poured in, blinding her after hours of darkness. Hands grabbed her vest and hauled her out. Her legs buckled the moment her boots hit concrete. Someone caught her before she collapsed completely, fingers digging into her arms hard enough to leave bruises. Easy, one of them said. Vance wants her conscious. Scarlett blinked until her vision cleared. They were in an underground parking garage. Commercial, massive, lined with concrete pillars and empty spaces. The air smelled like oil and exhaust, and something metallic she recognized as fear. Her own fear, sharp and animal. 4 men surrounded her. The leader from the forest and 3 others she didn't recognize. All armed, all watching her with the detached interest of people who'd done this before. Welcome to Vance Holdings, the leader said. You're about to meet the man who killed your father. They dragged her toward an elevator. Scarlett's mind raced through her limited options. Her hands were still zip-tied behind her back. She was outnumbered, outgunned, pregnant, and approximately 300 miles from anyone who might help her. Lucas was either bleeding out in the Adirondack wilderness or he was part of this, part of the trap that had closed around her the moment she'd trusted him with her life. The elevator doors opened. They shoved her inside. One man pressed a button marked SL3, sublevel 3. The doors closed and the elevator descended with mechanical precision. Scarlett forced herself to breathe, to think. Her father had survived 40 years in this world by staying 10 steps ahead of everyone. She had his blood, his mind, his ruthlessness buried somewhere beneath the social worker persona she'd worn for 28 years. Time to find it. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a corridor that looked nothing like a parking garage and everything like a high-security facility. White walls, LED lighting, cameras mounted at regular intervals, doors with biometric locks and warning labels Scarlett couldn't read from this angle. They walked her down the corridor. Her boots squeaked against polished floors. Somewhere ahead she heard voices, arguing, tense, the kind of conversation that stopped the moment they approached. The leader pushed open a door. Inside was an office that screamed power and money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking what Scarlett guessed was still Manhattan, despite the sub-level location, probably some architectural trick with mirrors or screens. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, art on the walls that looked expensive enough to fund a small country. And behind the desk sat Marcus Vance. He looked exactly like his photographs. Silver hair, expensive grooming, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers and political campaigns. But his eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of someone who'd spent decades destroying people and never lost sleep over it. Ms. Hayes, he said warmly, like they were meeting for lunch instead of a kidnapping. Please, sit. The men shoved her into a chair across from the desk. One of them cut the zip ties. Blood rushed back into Scarlett's hands with pins and needles agony. She flexed her fingers and kept her face blank. I apologize for the dramatic extraction, Vance continued, but you've become rather difficult to reach through conventional channels. Conventional channels, Scarlett repeated. Her voice came out hoarse. You mean murder and kidnapping? Vance smiled. I mean business. Your father understood that. He and I played this game for 20 years. Attack, counterattack, alliance, betrayal. It was almost friendly by the end. Friendly? Scarlett's laugh was sharp, broken. You poisoned him. I accelerated his timeline. There's a difference. Vance leaned back in his chair. Richard was dying anyway. Cancer, stage 4, terminal. I simply ensured that his death occurred before he could transfer certain assets into protective trusts that would have made them inaccessible to acquisition. Assets? Scarlett felt rage building in her chest, hot and choking. You murdered my father for real estate and stock portfolios. I murdered your father because he was in my way, and because he made the mistake of believing his daughter was safely hidden in Brooklyn working with foster children. Vance's expression shifted into something that might have been admiration. He underestimated you. I won't make that mistake. Scarlett forced herself to meet his eyes. What do you want? Simple. You sign over controlling interest in Hayes Technologies, Hayes International Shipping, and Sovereign Security Solutions. In exchange, I let you live. You keep the real estate, the luxury holdings, enough money to be comfortable for the rest of your life. But the core empire, the companies with actual power, those become mine. And if I refuse? Vance gestured toward the windows. Scarlett turned to look. On one of the screens that she'd thought showed city views, a live feed appeared. Lucas King, tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, blood running from a cut above his eye. His tactical vest was gone. His shirt was torn. He looked half-conscious. Scarlett's heart stopped. Mr. King survived the forest, Vance said conversationally. Killed 3 of my men before we took him down. Impressive. Your father trained him well. He tapped something on his desk. The screen zoomed in on Lucas's face. He'll survive approximately 6 more hours of interrogation before organ failure becomes irreversible. Less if my people get creative. You're bluffing, Scarlett's voice shook. Lucas is your protector? Your father's most trusted security chief? The man you've been falling in love with over the past 3 weeks? Vance's smile widened. Oh, Ms. Hayes, you're so much like Richard. Brilliant, ruthless, capable of extraordinary things, but you both share the same fatal flaw. What's that? You care too much. Vance pulled a document from his desk drawer and slid it across the polished surface. Sign. Save Mr. King. Walk away from this alive, or refuse, watch him die slowly, and die yourself knowing you could have prevented it. Scarlett stared at the document. It was a transfer agreement, perfectly legal, transferring controlling interest in her father's core companies to a series of shell corporations Vance undoubtedly controlled. Her signature line waited at the bottom, mocking her. How do I know you'll keep your word? She asked. You don't, but you also don't have a choice. Vance pushed a pen toward her. You have 60 seconds to decide. Scarlett picked up the pen. Her hand trembled. She thought about her father, dying in that hospital bed while Vance's people poisoned him. She thought about Lucas, bleeding in a warehouse because he'd tried to protect her. She thought about the baby growing inside her, 8 weeks old and completely dependent on her survival. She thought about 4 years of her life poured into Ethan Calloway, only to be discarded the moment something better came along. She thought about power. Real power. The kind her father had built over 40 years. The kind Vance wanted to steal. Scarlett set down the pen. No, she said. Vance's expression didn't change. No? I'm not signing. Scarlett met his eyes. My father spent 40 years building that empire. He died protecting it, and I'll be damned if I let you take it because you think I'm weak enough to break. Even if it means watching Lucas King die? Scarlett's throat closed. Even then. For 3 seconds, silence filled the office. Then Vance started laughing. It wasn't the laugh of someone who'd won. It was the laugh of someone genuinely delighted. Richard would be so proud, Vance said, wiping his eyes. You really are his daughter. He stood up and walked to the windows. Unfortunately, you're also an idiot because I don't actually need your signature. He pressed something on his phone. The door behind Scarlett opened. Harrison Cole walked in. Scarlett's entire world shattered. Harrison looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, suit rumpled, expression grim. He met Scarlett's gaze and something passed between them. Regret, maybe. Or just acknowledgement. Hello, Scarlett, he said quietly. You. Scarlett's voice was barely a whisper. It was you. It was me. Harrison moved to stand beside Vance. I'm sorry. I genuinely am. Your father was a great man, but he was also dying, and his loyalty to you became a liability I couldn't afford. You poisoned him. Scarlett stood up, chair scraping backward. You stood in that hospital room and murdered him while I was in the hallway grieving. I gave him peace. Harrison's tone was almost gentle. He was suffering. The cancer was destroying him from the inside. I simply murdered him. Scarlett lunged forward. Two of Vance's men grabbed her, forcing her back into the chair. You were his attorney, his friend. He trusted you for 32 years. And I served him faithfully for 31 of those years. Harrison pulled out his own chair and sat, suddenly looking older than his age. But 12 months ago, he started making decisions that would have destroyed everything, putting you in his will, planning to bring you into the Empire, creating protective trusts that would have locked up assets for generations. He was building you a throne, Scarlett, and in doing so, he was dismantling the very mechanisms that made the Empire functional. So you killed him. So I made a deal. Harrison gestured toward Vance. Marcus and I have been negotiating for 8 months. He wanted access to Hayes Technologies and international shipping. I wanted to ensure the Empire's infrastructure remained intact and operational. We reached an agreement. You sold him out. Scarlett felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back ruthlessly. You sold out my father for money, for survival. Harrison's expression hardened. Richard built an empire on blood and ruthlessness, but he softened at the end, started caring about legacy and family and all the things that make men weak. He would have handed you an empire you couldn't possibly manage, surrounded you with sharks who would have torn you apart within months. I saved you from that. By killing him and handing everything to Vance? By creating a transition that keeps the infrastructure intact. Harrison pulled out another document. This is a power of attorney agreement. Richard signed it 6 months before he died, giving me full legal authority to act on his behalf in matters of estate management. Scarlett's blood went cold. That's a forgery. It's notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. Harrison slid the document across to Vance. With this, we don't need Scarlett's signature. I have full authority to transfer assets as Richard's legal representative. You can't do this, Scarlett said. I'll fight it. I'll take you to court. You'll do nothing. Vance's voice cut through her protests like a blade. Because if you fight this, I release security footage of Lucas King entering your father's hospital room 11 times during his final week. I release financial records showing payments from Sovereign Security Solutions to the pharmaceutical company that manufactured the poison. I make it look like Lucas killed Richard on your orders so you could inherit faster. That's a lie. Of course it's a lie. But it's a convincing lie backed by real evidence that Harrison and I have been manufacturing for months. Vance leaned against his desk. You take us to court, we destroy Lucas's reputation and implicate you as an accessory to patricide. You lose everything and spend the next decade fighting criminal charges. Or you walk away now, keep your money, and disappear quietly while we clean up your father's mess. Scarlett looked between them. Harrison, who'd stood beside her at her father's funeral with tears in his eyes. Vance, who'd orchestrated everything with the patience of someone who'd spent 20 years planning this exact moment. What about Lucas? She asked. Lucas dies. Vance's tone suggested this was obvious. He knows too much, and unlike you, he has no leverage. Let him go. Take everything else, but let him go. No, please. The word tasted like ash. I'm begging you. Take the companies. Take my father's empire. Just let Lucas live. Vance studied her face. You really love him, don't you? After 3 weeks, you've fallen for the dangerous man who made you feel powerful. He shook his head. Richard would be disappointed. He raised you better than this. My father didn't raise me at all, Scarlett said quietly. He kept me at a distance my entire life. And maybe if he'd brought me into this world sooner, if he'd taught me how it really worked, maybe I could have saved him. Maybe, Harrison agreed. Or maybe you would have gotten him killed faster. Richard kept you separate because he loved you. That was his weakness. And it's yours. Scarlett closed her eyes. Thought about her father. About all those missed birthdays and holidays, all those years of feeling like an afterthought. And now she understood. He'd been protecting her from exactly this, from men like Vance and Harrison who saw people as assets to be leveraged or eliminated. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about what kind of world she was bringing a child into. She thought about Lucas bleeding in a warehouse, waiting to die because he'd tried to protect her. And she made a choice. "I want to see him," she said. Vance raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because if you're going to kill him, I want to say goodbye. Give me that much. Then I'll sign whatever you want. I'll disappear. I'll never challenge the transfer. Just let me see him one last time." Vance and Harrison exchanged glances. Some silent conversation passed between them. "Fine," Vance said finally. "You have 5 minutes. But Ms. Hayes, if you try anything heroic, I'll make sure he dies slowly enough to regret it." They walked her through the facility, 3 levels down, more corridors, more locked doors. Finally, they reached a warehouse-style space lined with storage containers and industrial equipment. In the center, tied to a chair beneath a single hanging bulb, was Lucas King. He looked worse in person than he had on the screen. Blood matted his hair, his left eye was swollen shut, his breathing was shallow, labored. But when he saw Scarlett, something flickered in his remaining eye. Recognition. Warning. 5 minutes, Vance said. He and Harrison and the guards withdrew to the far end of the warehouse. Close enough to watch. Too far to hear whispered conversation. Scarlett crossed to Lucas and dropped to her knees in front of his chair. Her hands found his face, careful of the bruises. "Lucas," she whispered, "can you hear me?" "Scarlett." His voice was destroyed, barely audible. "You shouldn't be here. They gave me a choice, sign over the Empire or watch you die." "Don't sign." Lucas's good eye focused on her with desperate intensity. "Whatever they're offering, don't believe them. Vance will kill us both regardless." "I know." Scarlett leaned closer, lips nearly touching his ear. "Listen to me. In my left boot, there's a knife. Small blade, ceramic, no metal. They didn't find it during the search." Lucas went very still. "What are you planning?" "Something stupid. Something my father would never approve of." Scarlett pulled back just enough to meet his eye. "But I'm not my father, and I'm done playing by rules that got him killed." "Scarlett, do you trust me?" she asked. Lucas stared at her. Blood ran down his face. His breathing was ragged, but his voice was steady when he answered. "Yes." "Good." Scarlett's hand moved to her boot, fingers finding the small ceramic blade she'd taken from her father's desk in the Adirondack cabin and hidden before the attack. "Because in about 30 seconds, things are going to get very violent." She palmed the knife, stood up, turned to face Vance and Harrison. "I've made my decision," she called out. Her voice echoed in the warehouse. "I'll sign, I'll give you everything, but first, I need you to answer one question." Vance stepped forward. "What question?" "Did my father know?" Scarlett asked. "At the end? Did he know you were betraying him, Harrison? Did he die understanding what you'd done?" Harrison's expression cracked. "Yes. He knew. I told him in the hospital that final night. I needed him to understand why." "And what did he say?" "He said," Harrison's voice broke, "he said that he hoped you would be stronger than he was, that you would survive what was coming, that you would become the kind of woman who could navigate this world without losing herself." Scarlett nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me that." Then she moved, fast. Faster than anyone expected from a pregnant social worker who'd spent 3 weeks playing dress-up in her father's empire. She closed the distance to Vance in 3 strides, ceramic knife flashing upward. Vance grabbed her wrist, but she'd anticipated that, used his momentum against him, twisted and drove her knee into his stomach hard enough to double him over. Behind her, Lucas was already moving. He'd been working his restraints while she distracted them, using the knife she'd dropped within reach to saw through the ropes. Now he surged to his feet, grabbed his chair, and swung it into the nearest guard's head with brutal efficiency. Gunfire exploded through the warehouse. Scarlett hit the ground, rolled, came up behind a storage container. Bullets punched through metal above her head. She could hear Lucas fighting, the sound of fists hitting flesh, a gun clattering to concrete, someone screaming. Harrison was shouting orders. Vance was on his phone, calling for backup, and Scarlett was running out of time. She spotted Lucas across the warehouse, trading blows with 2 guards simultaneously. He was holding his own, but barely. Injured, exhausted, outnumbered. One of the guards raised his gun. Scarlett threw the ceramic knife. It wasn't much of a throw. She'd never trained for this, but desperation gave her accuracy she didn't know she had. The blade caught the guard in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped his weapon. Lucas used the distraction to finish them both. Then he was moving toward her, blood-soaked and limping but alive. "Exit?" Scarlett gasped. "Loading dock. North wall." Lucas grabbed her hand. They ran. More guards poured into the warehouse. The sound of boots on concrete echoed like thunder. Scarlett's lungs burned. Her legs felt like concrete. The baby, oh God, the baby. She pressed one hand to her stomach and kept running. They burst through a door into the loading dock. A massive garage door stood partially open, revealing pre-dawn Manhattan beyond. Freedom. Survival. Lucas pulled her toward the opening. A gunshot cracked through the air. Lucas stumbled. Scarlett caught him before he fell, felt hot blood spreading across his shirt. He'd been hit. Center mass, maybe lung, maybe heart. Definitely fatal without immediate medical attention. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. Go," Lucas managed. Blood bubbled at his lips. "Run. Survive. Finish this." "I'm not leaving you." Scarlett looked back. Harrison and Vance were approaching with 4 armed guards. 30 seconds, maybe less. "I'm not—" Lucas grabbed her face in both hands. "You're Richard Hayes' daughter. Act like it." He shoved her toward the opening. "Go!" Scarlett ran. She burst out into the street, pre-dawn light making everything look surreal and wrong. Her hands were covered in Lucas's blood. Her dress was torn. She was 8 weeks pregnant and completely alone, and the man she'd started to love was dying in a warehouse behind her. She ran 3 blocks before her body gave out. She collapsed against a brick wall in an alley, gasping for air, and pulled out the secure phone Lucas had given her weeks ago, the one programmed with emergency numbers. She dialed. 1 ring, 2. A voice answered. "Hayes Emergency Protocol, state your identity." "Scarlett Hayes, daughter of Richard Hayes. I need Victoria Kane. Now." "Hold." 10 seconds of silence that felt like hours. Then Victoria's voice, sharp and alert despite the early hour. "Ms. Hayes, what's your location?" "I don't know. Somewhere in Manhattan. Vance Holdings facility. Lucas is—" Her voice broke. "Lucas is shot. Harrison Cole betrayed us. They killed my father. They're going to kill me. I need— Your phone has GPS. We're tracking you now. Extraction team is 15 minutes out." Victoria's voice was steady, commanding. "Stay on the line. Stay hidden. Don't engage anyone. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good. Because when my team gets there, we're going to war." Scarlett pressed herself deeper into the alley shadows, Lucas's blood drying on her hands, her father's empire crumbling around her, and waited for dawn to break over Manhattan. The city was waking up, and Scarlett Hayes was done running. Victoria Kane arrived with 12 operatives and enough firepower to start a small war. Scarlett heard them before she saw them. The screech of tires, boots hitting pavement, the controlled chaos of professionals moving into position. She stayed pressed against the alley wall, Lucas's blood crusted on her hands, watching dawn break over Manhattan in shades of gold and gray. A woman in tactical gear appeared at the alley entrance. Victoria. Scarlett recognized her from meetings at the penthouse. Sharp features, cold eyes, the kind of presence that suggested military background and zero tolerance for weakness. "Ms. Hayes." Victoria crossed the alley in 3 strides and dropped into a crouch beside Scarlett. "Are you injured?" "No, but Lucas—" Scarlett's voice cracked. "They shot him. Center mass. He's still inside the facility with Vance and Harrison, and we know." Victoria pulled a tablet from her vest and showed Scarlett a schematic of the Vance Holdings building. Red dots marked guard positions. Blue dots showed her team's deployment. "We've had the building under surveillance for 6 hours. David Chen alerted us when the server breach happened. We've been waiting for the right moment to move." 6 hours? Scarlett felt rage surge through exhaustion. "Lucas was being tortured and you were just watching?" "We were gathering evidence." Victoria's tone was flat, unapologetic. "Your father taught us to never strike without overwhelming proof and superior positioning. We have both now." She tapped the tablet. Harrison Cole's communications with Marcus Vance, financial transfers, hospital access records, video footage of Harrison entering your father's room with compounds that match the toxicology report. Everything we need to bury them both. I don't care about evidence. Scarlett grabbed Victoria's vest. Lucas is dying in there. We have to... Medical team is already moving. Victoria pulled up another screen showing thermal imaging. Lucas King's heat signature is still active. Weak, but present. He's in the loading dock where you left him. Vance's people moved him there to use as bait in case you came back. Then we're going back. Yes, but we're doing this properly. Victoria stood and pulled Scarlett to her feet. Your father spent 40 years building this empire through precision and overwhelming force. Today, you're going to learn why. They moved to the command vehicle parked at the end of the alley, a black van that looked civilian on the outside but was packed with surveillance equipment and weapons inside. Victoria handed Scarlett a tactical vest and a comm unit. You're staying in the vehicle, Victoria said. The hell I am. You're 8 weeks pregnant and covered in blood. You're a liability, not an asset. Scarlett met her eyes. That's my empire in there. My father's legacy. The man I... She stopped. Lucas went in there to protect me. I'm not abandoning him. Victoria studied her face. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement. You're Richard's daughter, all right. She pulled out a handgun and checked the magazine. You know how to use one of these? Lucas tried to teach me. I'm terrible. Then stay behind me and don't shoot unless I tell you to. Victoria handed her the weapon anyway. Safety's here. Point at bad guys. Squeeze trigger. Try not to hit our people. Got it? Scarlett took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, cold and solid in her hands. Got it. They moved as a unit. Victoria and Scarlett at the center, 6 operatives forming a protective diamond around them. The remaining team members held positions around the building perimeter, cutting off escape routes and monitoring for NYPD response. Local police are being managed, Victoria murmured into her comm. We have 20 minutes before official channels start asking questions. Make them count. They entered through the same loading dock Scarlett had escaped from 30 minutes earlier. Dawn light filtered through the partially open garage door, illuminating the warehouse in harsh shadows. Blood stained the concrete where Lucas had fallen, but his body was gone. Victoria's hand went up. Everyone stopped. She pointed toward the far end of the warehouse. Movement. Shadows shifting behind storage containers. At least 8 hostiles, maybe more. They're expecting us, Victoria whispered, which means this is a kill box. So what do we do? Victoria smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We spring the trap and turn it inside out. She made a series of hand signals. Her team split into 3 groups, 2 flanking parties and 1 center assault. Victoria pulled Scarlett behind a concrete pillar just as gunfire erupted across the warehouse. The sound was deafening. Bullets punched through metal and concrete. Scarlett pressed herself flat against the pillar, gun clutched in both hands, heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Victoria returned fire with clinical precision. 3 shots. 3 targets down. She moved like water, like violence made graceful through years of practice. Beside her, Scarlett felt useless and terrified, and furiously angry all at once. There! One of Victoria's operatives shouted, pointing toward a door at the warehouse's far end. They're moving the asset! Scarlett saw them, 2 guards dragging Lucas's unconscious body through the doorway. Blood trailed behind them. He wasn't moving. Go! Victoria barked. Asset recovery is priority 1. 3 operatives broke from cover and sprinted toward the door. Gunfire chased them. 1 went down, clutching his leg. The other 2 made it through. Victoria grabbed Scarlett's arm. Stay here. Do not move. If anyone who isn't wearing Hayes tactical gear comes through that door, you shoot them. Understand? Where are you going? To find Harrison Cole and Marcus Vance. Victoria's expression turned absolutely lethal. Because they're not getting out of this building alive. She disappeared into the chaos. Scarlett crouched behind the pillar, alone except for the wounded operative 20 feet away who was applying pressure to his leg wound and speaking rapidly into his comm unit. The gunfire was moving deeper into the building. Voices shouted commands. Somewhere, glass shattered. Time stretched and compressed. Seconds felt like hours. Every shadow looked like a threat. Then the door Victoria had indicated opened. A man stepped through. Not Hayes' tactical gear. Expensive suit, blood spattered, holding a gun with the awkward grip of someone who didn't use weapons often. Harrison Cole. Scarlett raised her gun. Her hands shook so badly she could barely keep it steady. Harrison saw her and stopped. For 3 seconds they stared at each other across the warehouse. The attorney who'd murdered her father and the daughter he'd underestimated. "Scarlett," Harrison said. His voice was steady despite everything. "Put down the gun." "No. You're not a killer. You're a social worker who helps children. This isn't who you are." "You don't know who I am." Scarlett's finger found the trigger. "You didn't know my father either. Not really. You thought he was weak because he loved me. You thought that made him vulnerable." "It did make him vulnerable." Harrison took a step closer. "Love is weakness in this world, Scarlett. It's the hook that powerful people use to control you. Your father finally understood that at the end. That's why he tried to keep you separate. That's why he built walls between you and the Empire. He built walls to protect me." Scarlett's voice shook. "From men like you. From men like Vance. From everyone who would use me as leverage against him." "And how did that work out?" Harrison took another step. "He's dead. You're here with a gun you don't know how to use. And the Empire is falling apart because neither of you understood how this world actually functions." "I understand perfectly." Scarlett adjusted her grip on the gun. "You kill people who threaten you. You destroy anyone who gets in your way. You trade loyalty for power and justify it by saying everyone else would do the same." She met his eyes. "My father did all of that, but he also loved me. And that's what you'll never understand. Power without something worth protecting is just emptiness with expensive furniture." Harrison smiled sadly. "Richard said the same thing, right before I poisoned him." He raised his gun. "I'm sorry, Scarlett. I genuinely am. But you're too dangerous to leave alive." Scarlett pulled the trigger. The gun kicked in her hands. The shot went wide, punching through the wall 3 feet from Harrison's head. He flinched, but didn't go down. She fired again. This shot caught him in the shoulder. He spun backward, gun clattering from his grip. Blood bloomed across his expensive shirt. Scarlett moved forward, gun still raised, muscle memory from the brief training sessions with Lucas overriding her terror. She kicked Harrison's weapon away and stood over him. "Where's Lucas?" she demanded. Harrison pressed his hand to his bleeding shoulder. "Sublevel 4, medical bay. Vance is using him as insurance. He thinks—" He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "He thinks you'll trade yourself for King's life." "He's right." Scarlett lowered her gun. "How do I get there?" "Elevator past the loading dock. Biometric access. You'll need—" Harrison pulled a keycard from his pocket and held it up. "This." Scarlett grabbed the keycard, started to turn away. "Scarlett," Harrison called. His voice was weaker now. "For what it's worth, your father would be proud. You're stronger than he ever was." "No," Scarlett said quietly. "I'm exactly as strong as he taught me to be. I just didn't know it until you forced me to become it." She left him bleeding on the concrete and ran for the elevator. Sublevel 4 was quieter than the warehouse. Sterile. The walls were white, the lighting fluorescent and harsh. Scarlett moved through corridors that smelled like antiseptic and fear, keycard gripped in one hand, gun in the other. She found the medical bay behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Inside, Lucas was strapped to a table, chest wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. Medical equipment beeped around him. Heart monitor showing a weak but steady rhythm, IV drip, running clear fluid into his arm. His eyes were closed. He looked dead except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Marcus Vance stood beside the table, holding a syringe filled with something that looked pharmaceutical and lethal. "Ms. Hayes," he said calmly. "I wondered if you'd come." Scarlett raised her gun. "Say, step away from him." "Or what, you'll shoot me?" Vance smiled. "We both know you don't have the stomach for it. You couldn't even sign papers to save his life. You think you can pull that trigger? Try me." Vance's smile widened. He pressed the syringe against Lucas's IV port. "This is potassium chloride. It will stop his heart within 30 seconds. Undetectable if administered properly. The same compound I used to finish your father when the cancer wasn't killing him fast enough." Scarlett felt ice flood her veins. "You were there, in the hospital. You killed him yourself. Harrison did most of the work. But yes, I delivered the final dose. Vance's expression was almost conversational. Richard and I talked for an hour that last night. He knew he was dying, knew I'd won, but he still tried to negotiate, tried to make deals to protect you. He laughed. Even at the end, he was weak, caring about his daughter more than his empire. That wasn't weakness. Scarlett's voice was steady despite the rage burning through her. That was the only thing that made him stronger than you. Sentiment. Vance's thumb hovered over the syringe plunger. Put down the gun, Ms. Hayes, or I push this and watch Lucas King die the same way your father did. Scarlett lowered the gun, set it on the floor, stepped back with her hands raised. Good girl, Vance said. He pulled the syringe away from the IV port. Now, that's... Lucas's eyes snapped open. His hand shot out and grabbed Vance's wrist with speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone who'd been shot in the chest. Vance made a choked sound of surprise. The syringe fell, shattering against the floor. Lucas ripped the IV from his arm and surged off the table. He was moving on pure adrenaline and fury, bandages coming loose, blood spreading across his skin. He drove Vance backward into the medical equipment. Metal crashed, glass shattered. Scarlett grabbed her gun and moved forward. Lucas and Vance were grappling, trading blows, years of hatred condensed into brutal violence. Vance was older, but he fought dirty, fingers jabbing toward Lucas's eyes, knee driving toward his groin. Lucas blocked and countered with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been trained to kill and had nothing left to lose. Scarlett, Lucas shouted. The evidence, recording devices, this room. Scarlett looked around frantically. Cameras mounted in corners, a computer terminal against the far wall. She ran to it, fingers flying across the keyboard. The system was password protected, but Harrison's keycard bypassed the first layer of security. Behind her, Lucas slammed Vance into the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Vance's head snapped back, blood poured from his nose. This is for Richard, Lucas said quietly. He hit Vance 3 times, precise, controlled, devastating. Vance crumpled to the floor and didn't get up. Lucas stood over him, breathing hard, blood running down his chest from the gunshot wound that should have killed him. The vest, he gasped. Kevlar under the shirt. Broke ribs, punctured lung, but the bullet didn't hit anything immediately fatal. You're still shot, Scarlett said. You need medical attention. I need you to finish this. Lucas pointed toward the computer. Recording devices. Every room in this facility. Vance documented everything. Business meetings, illegal deals, murders. Your father's death is on those files. We just need to find it. Scarlett turned back to the terminal. Her fingers flew across the keys, searching file directories, pulling up video archives. There were hundreds of recordings, thousands. Years of Marcus Vance's criminal empire documented in brutal detail. She found the file dated 3 weeks ago. Her father's final night in the hospital. She clicked it. The video showed a hospital room. Richard Hayes in the bed, skeletal from cancer, tubes running from his arms. And standing beside him, holding a syringe, was Marcus Vance. The audio was clear, perfect, damning. I'm sorry it came to this, Richard, Vance's recorded voice said. You were a worthy opponent, but you made the mistake of caring more about your daughter than your empire. That weakness cost you everything. My daughter isn't weak, Richard's voice rasped. She's stronger than both of us, and when she finds out what you've done, she won't. Vance pressed the syringe into the IV port. Because by the time she inherits, I'll have dismantled your empire piece by piece. She'll have money, but no power. Wealth, but no protection. And eventually, she'll sign over whatever's left just to survive. You don't know her, Richard whispered. You don't know what she's capable of. I know she's a social worker from Brooklyn who helps foster children. Vance's smile was audible. Not exactly empire builder material. She's my daughter. Richard's eyes closed. That's all the material she needs. The recording showed Vance watching Richard's vital signs drop. Documented the moment Richard Hayes died while his killer stood over him wearing a smile. Scarlett watched the screen through tears she couldn't control. Her father's last words. His final moments. The proof that would destroy Marcus Vance and everyone who'd helped him. Copy it, Lucas said hoarsely. He'd moved to stand behind her, one hand pressed against his bleeding chest. Copy everything. Send it to Victoria, to the FBI, To every news outlet in the country. Make sure they can't bury this. Scarlett's fingers moved across the keyboard. She copied files, uploaded them to cloud servers, sent encrypted packages to email addresses Lucas recited. Within minutes, evidence of Marcus Vance's empire of corruption was spreading across networks that couldn't be contained or deleted. Behind them, Vance groaned and tried to sit up. Lucas kicked him back down with cold efficiency. "Stay there," Lucas said. "Federal prosecutors will want you conscious for your arraignment." Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Victoria appeared in the doorway with 4 operatives, weapons raised. She took in the scene, Lucas bleeding, Scarlett at the computer, Vance on the floor, and nodded once. "Clean sweep," she reported. "Harrison Cole is in custody. Guards are neutralized. Building is secure." She looked at Lucas. "You look like hell." "Feel worse." Lucas swayed slightly. Scarlett moved to support him. "But we got him. We got them all." "Yes," Victoria said. "You did." The FBI arrived 20 minutes later. Then the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then NYPD and enough federal agents to secure a small country. Scarlett sat in the back of an ambulance while EMTs checked her vitals and confirmed that despite everything, the baby was fine. 8 weeks and holding. Growing something that would never know its grandfather but would inherit his empire. Lucas was in a different ambulance, being stabilized for transport to Manhattan General. The EMTs said he'd survive. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, blood loss, and trauma, but nothing that couldn't heal given time and proper care. Harrison Cole was being loaded into a police transport, hands cuffed, shoulder bandaged. He saw Scarlett watching and held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away. Marcus Vance was already in federal custody. The evidence Scarlett had uploaded was spreading through official channels. By evening, his arrest would be front-page news. By the end of the week, his empire would be dismantled by prosecutors who'd spent years waiting for exactly this moment. Victoria approached the ambulance with a tablet. "Media is requesting statements. Stock markets are reacting. We need to issue official communications about the Hayes Empire and its leadership status." "Not yet," Scarlett said. "First, I need to do something." She found Ethan Calloway at his office 3 hours later. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, expensive suit rumpled, the sheen of a man who'd realized exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. He was sitting at his desk staring at his computer screen when Scarlett walked in unannounced. "Scarlett," he said, his voice cracked, "I heard about the Vance situation. About what happened to you. Are you—" "I'm fine." Scarlett closed the door behind her. "Better than fine, actually." Ethan stood up slowly. "Look, about everything that happened between us, the divorce, Vanessa, the way I handled things, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. You just wanted what you thought was a better deal." Scarlett's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You looked at me and saw a social worker with student loans and no prospects. You looked at Vanessa and saw money and connections and an easier path to power. It wasn't like that."
Yes,
"Yes, it was." Scarlett pulled an envelope from her bag. "I'm not here to argue with you, Ethan. I'm here to give you this." Ethan took the envelope with shaking hands, opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000, the exact amount he'd offered her to disappear quietly. "What is this?" he asked. "Your payment." Scarlett met his eyes. "You offered me $50,000 to walk away from our marriage. I'm returning it. Consider us even." "Scarlett, I don't want your money. I want—" "What do you want, Ethan?" Scarlett asked. "Me? The Empire? A chance to explain why you betrayed 4 years of marriage for a woman whose family is filing for bankruptcy?" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. Because I don't want anything from you. Not your apology, not your money, not your regret. I just want you to understand something." "What?" "You had a queen and you traded her for survival money." Scarlett's voice was steady, final. "That check represents exactly what you're worth to me now. $50,000. A rounding error in my monthly interest payments." She turned toward the door. "Enjoy your wedding. I hear Vanessa's father is desperate enough that he'll probably still go through with it despite everything." "Scarlett, wait." She didn't wait. She walked out of Ethan Calloway's office and didn't look back. 6 months later, the Hayes empire was stronger than it had ever been. Under Scarlett's leadership, stock prices had soared. International partnerships expanded. The companies her father built evolved into something that honored his legacy while pushing into new territories. Because unlike Richard Hayes, his daughter didn't hide her strength. She stood in the boardroom overlooking Manhattan, 7 months pregnant now, her body curved with life despite everything she'd survived. The executives who'd once questioned her authority now deferred to her without hesitation. The board members her father had controlled through fear and money now followed her through something more powerful: respect. Victoria Kane sat at her right hand as head of security. David Chen had been promoted to COO after proving his loyalty during the Vance investigation. Margaret Ross managed international operations from London. James Mitchell oversaw the security divisions. And Lucas entered the boardroom slowly, still moving carefully 6 months after the shooting. The doctor said he'd carry the scars forever. Broken ribs that hadn't quite healed right. Lung capacity reduced by 30%. But he was alive. And he was hers. They'd spent the past 6 months rebuilding trust, working side by side, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with choosing someone when the crisis was over and ordinary life began. "Ready?" Lucas asked. His voice was still rough around the edges, damaged from the breathing tube they'd used during surgery. "Ready," Scarlett confirmed. They walked together to the conference table where Harrison Cole sat in federal custody, flanked by U.S. Marshals. He'd agreed to testify against Marcus Vance in exchange for a reduced sentence, 20 years instead of life. He'd spend the rest of his productive years in prison. "Ms. Hayes," Harrison said quietly. He looked older, diminished by orange prison scrubs and handcuffs. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "You murdered my father," Scarlett said. "I'm here because the prosecutors asked me to be, not because I have anything to say to you." "I understand." Harrison's voice was steady despite everything. "But I need you to know, I served your father faithfully for 31 years. I loved him like a brother. When I betrayed him, it wasn't because I stopped caring. It was because I cared too much about what he'd built to watch him dismantle it for sentiment." "You betrayed him because you were afraid," Scarlett corrected. "Afraid that when I inherited, I'd change things. Afraid that a woman might run the empire differently than the men who'd built it. Afraid that love and loyalty might prove stronger than fear and money." Harrison looked at her for a long moment. "And has it? Proved stronger?" Scarlett thought about the past 6 months, about rebuilding her father's empire while growing his grandchild, about learning to lead with strength and compassion in equal measure, about Lucas, who'd taken a bullet for her and asked for nothing in return except the chance to stand beside her. "Yes," she said simply, "it has." Harrison nodded slowly. "Then your father was right. You're stronger than either of us." He looked at the marshals. "I'm ready to go back." They escorted him out. Scarlett stood at the window, watching the city that had tried to destroy her and failed. Lucas came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired, scared, powerful." Scarlett pressed one hand to her swollen stomach. "Like I'm about to become responsible for another human life when I'm still figuring out my own." "You'll be a good mother." Lucas's hand covered hers. "Better than you think. Because you understand what your father never did." "What's that?" "That protecting someone doesn't mean keeping them separate. It means teaching them to survive when you're gone." Lucas turned to face her. "Your father loved you by keeping you distant. You'll love your child by making them strong." Scarlett felt tears burn behind her eyes. "I wish he could see this, see what we've built, see that his daughter wasn't weak." "He knows." Lucas's voice was certain. "Wherever he is, he knows." They stood together at the window, watching Manhattan glow in the afternoon light, the city where Richard Hayes had built an empire, where Scarlett Hayes had claimed it, where a new generation would grow up knowing that power came not from fear or money or ruthlessness alone, but from the combination of strength and the willingness to fight for something worth protecting. Below them, the city moved and breathed and lived. Millions of people pursuing their own versions of power and survival. And somewhere among them, Vanessa Whitmore was probably signing divorce papers. Ethan Calloway was probably drinking alone in his apartment, understanding too late what he'd thrown away. Marcus Vance was sitting in a federal prison awaiting trial. And Scarlett Hayes, social worker turned billionaire, daughter turned empire builder, woman transformed by fire into something her father would have recognized and feared and loved, stood at the top of it all and finally understood what power really meant. It meant surviving when everyone expected you to break. It meant becoming stronger than your trauma. It meant building something worth protecting and then protecting it with everything you had. 3 months later, Scarlett gave birth to a daughter in the same hospital where her father had died. She named her Eleanor, after her mother. Eleanor Hayes, born into power but not defined by it, heir to an empire but free to choose her own path, protected by a mother who'd learned the hard way that love wasn't weakness. It was the only thing strong enough to justify the weight of all that power. Lucas stood beside Scarlett's hospital bed, holding the baby with the careful reverence of someone who'd never expected to have anything worth protecting. His hands were scarred. His breathing was still labored from the gunshot wound, but his eyes held something Scarlett had never seen before. Peace. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours," Scarlett corrected. "If you want her to be." Lucas looked up, eyes shining. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking you to help me raise her, to teach her how to survive this world without losing herself in it, to show her that strength and kindness aren't opposites." Scarlett reached for his hand. "I'm asking you to build a life with me, not because we're bound by crisis or revenge or survival, but because I love you, and because my daughter deserves a father who will protect her the way you protected me." Lucas set the baby carefully in the hospital bassinet. Then he leaned down and kissed Scarlett, slow, careful, full of promise. "Yes," he said, "to all of it. Yes." Outside the hospital window, Manhattan stretched toward the horizon in all its complicated, brutal, beautiful glory, the city that had taken everything from Scarlett and forced her to become something she'd never imagined, the city that held her father's empire and her daughter's future. And somewhere in the shadows of that city, the people who'd underestimated Richard Hayes' daughter were learning a lesson that would echo through the corridors of power for decades. Never mistake kindness for weakness. Never assume someone is breakable just because they've been broken before. And never, ever underestimate what a woman will become when you force her to choose between destruction and evolution. Scarlett Hayes had chosen evolution, and the world would never be the same.